Chapter 21. The Rout of the Orcs. The orc captain stood frozen. His fury had drained away and left only terror the moment Tarns and Nephili appeared. Surrounded by orcs, Tarns did not reach for Morgwyn's sacred spear. Its long wind-up made it useless in such close quarters. Instead, he tightened his grip on the plain greatsword he carried. The captain remembered that sword from the timid survivors who had fled Tarns. They had told of an armored human wizard swinging a massive blade and mowing orcs down as if they were nothing. At first, the captain had scorned them as cowards. He had seen human knights before. Some used greatswords, but they never lasted long and became food for wargs. He knew normal human stamina couldn't sustain such a weapon. His plan had been to wear the humans down and then let the wargs finish them. Seeing Tarn's blade changed everything. Compared to the sweeping, blood-spraying destruction it made through orc ranks, the so-called greatswords he'd known looked like toothpicks. The thing in Tarn's hands seemed less a sword than a crude block of iron, and the captain couldn't detect any fatigue in the man swinging it. A distant crack of thunder and the scream of orcs snapped the captain back to reality. A storm of golden lightning tore toward them, sweeping up orcs and wargs alike. Gray bodies were cleaved, black blood sprayed like a burst waterskin. The warg beneath the captain snarled and shifted uneasily. He peered toward the storm and saw Nephili, the humanoid whirlwind of light, racing straight for him. "Get out of the way, you fools! All of you, get out of the way!" he roared, trying to force his men aside. They were too tightly packed by his orders to do anything but jostle. Even as he raised his blade, the warg under him reared, flung him clear, and bolted away. Nephili closed like a blade of lightning. Her axe, alive with golden storm, buried into the captain's skull, and as she pivoted, sliced horizontally through chest and ribs. He collapsed like a rag. She seized his head by the wiry hair and held it up, crimson eyes cold. The surrounding orcs watched their leader die in a flash with no resistance. Weapons clattered and formation evaporated into chaos. They turned and fled. Inside the outpost, the warg's savagery still flared, but the Kingric soldiers fought with discipline. Under coordinated volleys, the warg's attacks ground futilely against trained lines, and the fierce charge of a knight captain who ran down the thickest clusters of orcs like a hunting beast. The sight only increased the panic of the escaping orcs. Many stronger ones drove their blades into weaker comrades to clear a path and throw them back toward the human knights. A regular Kingric knight, spearhead stained with orc blood and organs, met Nephili on the field with 4 soldiers at his back. "Tarn is your majesty," he said, bowing before he registered the severed head in Nephili's hand, the captain's. A flash of disappointment crossed his face. He had fought toward that position for the same prize. He took comfort in seeing the other knight captains still hacking through orcs nearby. While the knight and Nephili spoke, the 4 soldiers shielded them and readied hand crossbows to pick off any orcs that broke from the rout. Nephili, slightly winded from her storm battle skill, nodded and issued crisp orders. "The orc captain is dead. Their formation is broken. Pursue, but don't be greedy. Do not advance too far. Any hurt men stay here for treatment. The rest, go sweep the outpost." "Yes, Nephili," the knight answered, then pointed to a soldier limping. "You, with the leg wound, stay and await aid." The wounded man protested but yielded. The bite from a warg had only grazed him through a gap in his greaves. Another soldier helped him toward the nearest watchtower. When the wounded man joked he wanted to make a good impression before Tarns, Nephili allowed herself the faintest of smiles. She understood soldiers far from home. She offered the orc captain's head to Godric, the knight, with a nod. "You fought your way here for it. Keep it." He used his spear tip to lift the head, staring at her in disbelief and envy as she turned back into the fray. Godric watched Nephili go, wishing he could prove himself as she had without trophies of enemy leaders. A few stones away at the relay station, the orc vice-captain, now effectively captain, glowered from beside the stone wall, a dozen ragged orcs at his back. Most of them had slipped from the former captain's control and returned to their old allegiance. "A human wizard's territory, and he thought it easy," the new captain spat. A scrawny, skittish orc crept up. "Captain, are we gonna run?" "If we run, how do we tell the boss we fled like dogs?" the vice-captain snapped, slapping the other's bald head. He had noticed a lone human woman earlier, no fortress refuge, and intended to butcher the relay station and bring her head to their master. He rallied his men and charged the building, expecting little resistance. They found the rooms empty. The vice captain ordered them to search for an underground entrance. Soon one was found, a black tunnel yawning into the earth. The orc who claimed discovery was promptly shoved in. Others were urged to follow, sliding down the stone walls into the dark. Fear erupted from the tunnel, a muffled shriek, then sounds of bone and flesh being crushed. The orcs at the front froze, then the first who had been shoved in was flung back out. His body burst like an overfull water skin. A massive, armored figure emerged from the gloom, a hulking humanoid, troll-sized, wearing a huge golden spherical helmet and wielding a spiked flail. Tarns had placed the pumpkin-head soldiers here to guard the relay station. From the orcs' perspective, they were monstrous trolls. The leading orc slashed at the helmet with a rusty sword. Only a dull clink answered. The blade nicked the gold but did no real harm. The pumpkin-head soldier growled within its near-closed helm, lowered its head, and charged. It knocked through the line in the tunnel, then roared and swung its flail. Orcs were smashed and thrown out, bones cracking under the spikes. Another pumpkin-head soldier joined, answering the call. Outside, the vice-captain's face drained. He had no hope of leveling the station now. The only thought left was escape. Then a cry rose behind him. "Baruch Kazad! Kazad I Menu! The dwarves are upon you!" Dwalin bellowed and surged forward, axe already swinging. Kili notched an arrow, drew, and loosed with deadly calm. The missile found the vice-captain's neck, and he collapsed, hand clamping uselessly at the wound as blood gushed out. Below, in the relay station's cellar, Selen had taken off her witch's glintstone crown and set it aside. Her delicate face was revealed as she bent over a scroll. The noise above made her frown briefly. Then she turned back to her work, as if nothing of consequence had happened. Chapter 22. The difference between a king and a warrior. Tarnis had already lost count of how many orcs had fallen to his blade. He wasn't even sure of the full outcome of Nephili Lux's and the Kingric royal army's actions. When the first pale ray of morning met the golden tree's own glow, the bodies of orcs and wargs, much to the dwarves' astonishment, began to turn into motes of gold and drift into the tree. Fili and Kili watched the golden tree sway in the breeze, eyes wide. "So beautiful," Fili breathed. "Yes," Kili agreed. "And Mr. Tarn says this is only a sapling. Imagine how glorious it'll be when it's grown, brother." Dwalin planted his battle axe, its blade still black with orc blood, into the earth, then smiled. "Maybe one day you'll be able to see this glow from the Blue Mountains." Kili frowned. "No thanks. I don't want it lighting up like day while I'm trying to sleep." Fili watched the bodies dissolve into golden particles and asked, curious, "Is the tree eating them?" Tarns walked over, heard the question, and smiled. "Not the bodies, the souls. The golden tree is taking their souls. It's the only thing those wicked things are giving back." The dwarves nodded. Better, they thought, for those hateful creatures to nourish the tree than to keep slaughtering the innocent. Tarns thanked them for their help and asked about injuries. Fili waved it off. "No need to thank us. We didn't do much. Your soldiers are impressive. The orcs threw off their armor and ran once your men charged. When we came out of Hate Fort, we only met orcs who'd routed here." Dwalin pointed at the pumpkin-head soldiers, sitting quietly under the tree's light, and asked, "Mr. Tarns, are those trolls?" Kili nodded in agreement. Tarnas looked at the soldiers, their oval helmets catching the gold, and shook his head. "No, they're poor, broken people. Something happened back home. Some of our soldiers went mad. Those bulky oval helmets were put on to calm them and keep them from hurting others. I tried taking the helmets off when they came to the lands between," Tarn said, "but even without them, they didn't return to who they were, so they keep them on." The dwarves looked on with sympathy. Kili tried to lighten the mood. "When they're quiet, they're kind of cute," he said, and promptly received a sharp kick from Fili. Dwalin half bowed toward the silent soldiers. "They're reliable," he said. "One day, when the golden tree is fully grown, perhaps they'll be healed," Tarn said. "For now, let's head back to Hate Fort. After fighting all night, we could all use a proper rest and a victory feast." At the word feast, the dwarves' stomachs all growled in unison. Then we accept with gratitude, Feely said, and they left the outpost. Rogier appeared from inside the outpost just as they were leaving. Tarns embraced him and teased, "Why weren't you in last night's fight?" Rogier straightened his wizard's hat, tired. Some orcs startled by the pumpkin heads ran toward where I'd hidden. I set out to hunt them down and ran into more fleeing orcs and wargs. They saw me alone and unarmored and attacked. He shrugged helplessly. The one good thing is many orcs died here. You should be able to summon something from the lands between again. Let's see which familiar faces show up. Tarns grinned. If you want, I can bring Darien over now. Rogier's smile wavered. I'm not ready. Meeting him now, after having 8 similar memories, I don't know how to face him. Tarns waved a hand. We're not in the lands between anymore. Your feud with D doesn't matter here. Even if you parted ways, he still watches you. Rogier sighed and looked at the golden tree. You're right. At least we're not breaking up over Deathblight anymore. He and I both owe each other an apology. Selen's sleepy voice cut in. While you two have your male bonding, breakfast is ready. Last night was too noisy. I couldn't read. She emerged from the tunnel, wearing her glintstone crown. Rogier's hand went to his rapier for a moment before he relaxed. He still wasn't used to calling a witch his ally. Selen laughed softly at his instinct. Tarnies, she said. Kenneth Haight should be at Haight Fort. You can go straight there. She only took a few steps before the transforming bodies caught her attention. She moved close to study them. Tarnies knew once she started observing she'd be absorbed until satisfied, so he and Rogier departed first. At Haight Fort, Nephili Lu had already arrived, bringing back the knight captain who had plunged himself into the slaughter. He stood weary and silent, exhausted from the night. Nephili pointed to him. I brought him back in your name, she told Tarns. Otherwise he would have chased the route onto the plains. He had no strength left to hold his sword. I did basic wound care. These people who believe in the Mother of Truth. When the knight captain saw Tarns, he dragged himself forward, knelt on one knee, and rasped, Reporting, my lord, I killed 54 orcs last night. Tarns blinked. 54? Even he had killed many, but reckoned his tally at just over 30. The orcs had routed after their captain fell. Most later deaths came from soldiers like this one pressing their advantage. The knight captain's armor, golden and green, was splashed with black blood. His cloak was torn, arrows stuck in the joints of his mail. Yet he stayed upright, waiting for Tarns. Well done, Tarns said. You deserve a reward. He produced an amulet from his spatial pack, a blood-red charm fashioned in the likeness of the Lord of Blood's delight. Even holding it felt like being watched by a deity. Tarns named it aloud as he offered it, Lord of Blood's joy. The knight captain's knees trembled. He rose and, trembling with exhaustion or joy, accepted the amulet and pressed it to his chest. Thank you, sir, he managed. This is proof of your valor, Tarns said, but it's not the pure blood knight medal. Go and have your wounds tended. Don't let hidden injuries fester. The knight captain bowed and staggered off. Nephili reported, over 70% of the orcs and wargs were eliminated. 7 of our people have minor injuries, 3 are seriously hurt. They're out of immediate danger. Bodies are fine and capable of movement. Tarns let out a relieved breath. How did they get seriously hurt? Nephili's expression softened into something like reproach. Partly your fault. Tarnis pointed at himself in surprise. Me? You underestimate what you mean to these soldiers, she said. To those who worship the golden tree, your words are like a command from a god. You ordered them to kill as many of the attackers as possible. They pushed themselves, like the knight captain, trying to take down one more orc because of you. The serious injuries were caused by exhaustion and then fighting through it. Rogier nodded. She's right. As the master of the golden tree and an Elden Lord in their eyes, your word carries the force of faith. When their faith and their king both tell them to press on, you can't expect every man to hold back. Tarns sighed. I suppose I need to be more mindful of what I say. I'm not an unknown tarnished anymore. Kenneth Haight stepped forward. Tarnis, your majesty, I have a report. Tarns nearly told him not to use that title, then remembered Nephili's words and let it pass. Go on. Kenneth cleared his throat. The orcs didn't breach Haight Fort, but they drained our arrow supply. He looked embarrassed. Our demi-human forces aren't expert archers, and many arrows were wasted. Hatefort hasn't had supplies since the Shattering, so our reserves are low. If possible, Your Majesty, please replenish arrows quickly so we can keep that same suppressive power in case of another large attack. We also need to inspect and repair the soldiers' weapons. Some will need replacement. And, he hesitated, I saw you rewarded the Knight Captain. You should consider rewards for the other brave soldiers and the demi-humans, too. Tarns felt a pang of nostalgia for the days when he and Melina wandered alone in the lands between, and his only concern was his own survival. Now there were many more lives and needs to bear. He listened carefully and answered, I understand. I'll handle the rewards and have a temporary solution for arrows and weapons. But relying on what we captured in the lands between won't be sustainable. Kenneth, before the Shattering, how did Hatefort get its supplies? Kenneth brightened. Before the Shattering, most supplies came from Moan City on the Weeping Peninsula, with some aid from Stormvale Castle. Moan City was close and produced arrows and weapons. Hatefort is purely military, while Moan is a large city with a big golden lineage population. Moan City. The name tugged Tarns's mind away from logistics and back to darker memories. An innocent girl lying in a pool of blood, Edgar of Moan City weeping at her knees. The image dissolved into a blind witch who looked like that girl and the thing she represented, Mad Flame. Anger tightened Tarns's fists. In one cycle, he had been misled into believing that taking on the mantle of the Mad Flame's lord would save that girl and end the cycle. Instead, the lands between fell into ruin and countless lives suffered. He could still see Melina's eyes in that cycle, walking through the orange-yellow blaze with every emotion flickering across her face: surprise, sorrow, disappointment, anger, disbelief, and an immeasurable hatred. Tarns, Your Majesty? Kenneth's cautious voice drew him back. It's nothing, Tarns said aloud. Go have breakfast. Leave me to think for a while. Nefeli, standing near enough to hear the low words and having her own memories of that cycle, put a steady hand on his shoulder. I will be your wings, she said. I will face that twisted, evil flame with you. She drew Roger and Kenneth away, and before she left she added, I'll have someone set aside breakfast for you. Tarnis nodded and watched them go. He stared up at the golden tree and exhaled. The dwarves' rations and seeds could solve food for the moment, but weapons and arrows would take more effort. Moan City would have the workshops and population to produce arrows and replace broken weapons. And it had a golem guard, an automatic defensive golem that could help secure the fort. Decision made. Tarns resolved to summon Moan City. It offered production capacity, civilian workers, and a golem defense that would make future warnings and guard duty far easier. Chapter 23. Soul Collector Orcs fled in panic. Wargs slunk away with their tails between their legs. If you wanted to know why, you only had to ask the wizard Tarnis. Feely, Keely, and Dwalin had been singing a spontaneously composed song with their fellow dwarves in Hate Fortress when a violent tremor ran through the hall. A golden light flashed into the room and then was gone just as suddenly. For a moment, all that remained was a stunned group of dwarves clutching whatever they could find to defend themselves. What's going on? Keely asked, propping a hard, dry baguette against the table. Feely checked over everyone to make sure no one was hurt, then exhaled with relief. Dwalin was leaning by the window, still holding a silver dinner fork with a half-eaten sausage skewered on it. He stared out, dazed, and called back to the others. Durin above, come quick. There's a huge castle out there. It just appeared. Feely and Keely exchanged glances. Feely shrugged. Why am I not surprised? Keely dipped his baguette into a bowl of honeyed milk and chewed calmly. I have a guess, brother. What is it? Feely asked, biting into his bacon and cheese sandwich. Keely swallowed and said, If we ever need houses outside the Blue Mountains, we can ask Mr. Tarns. He waves that magical staff of his, taps empty space, and poof, a fortress or castle appears. Complete. Feely snorted. Doesn't he have a staff? Maybe he just drives his greatsword into the ground. Keely's eyes brightened. Or he blows that whistle of his to summon a spirit steed. Then the castle pops up. And then the castle appears, the brothers finished together, grinning. Dwalin returned to his seat, stuffing the last of his sausage in his mouth, and said, It's not just a castle. This one's a whole territory. If I had to size it, maybe like that old river valley town, lands and all. Keely nearly choked from excitement. Then I have to go see. I was born in the Blue Mountains, but I've never seen River Valley Town. Mr. Tarns said he found someone who could teach me magic, so I'm going too. Feely, not wanting to be left behind, finished his breakfast in a hurry. Both brothers wanted to see if there might be a spell or two they could pick up. Tarns stood on the battlements of the newly risen Moan City Castle, where Lord Edgar had once made his final stand. Unlike the cruel vision of the lands between, streets piled with the bodies of the Kingrick royal army and the misbegotten, no gallows swaying with corpses, this place was eerily clean. The mountain of golden lineage bodies the misbegotten had made had vanished, replaced by the faintly luminous, immovable trunk of the golden tree. Still, the castle was quiet. No soldiers, no misbegotten, no settled townsfolk, only Tarns moving through the empty streets and workshops. Kenneth Haight had been right. The interior was complete, artisan workshops for tools and weapons, a central market for visiting merchants and noble houses. More civilian dwellings still clustered on the plains outside the walls. The ruined town, Minheriath, had been reshaped into the territory Tarns had summoned. The orcs in the distance, who had not yet entirely given up, would have seen the new owner now standing in their land. Tarns had placed Haight Fortress to the northwest of Moan City, near the Brandywine River, and farther northwest lay the Blue Mountains, where the Dwarves lived. The location made future trade and communication with the Blue Mountain Dwarves easy, and it allowed patrols to protect merchant routes. Haight Fortress sat close to Moan City's domain, on the outer edge of the old town ruins, meaning Feely and Keely had been moved a fair distance while eating breakfast and would likely need half a day's walk to reach the castle. Sellen's Inn and the small outpost were set not far to the northeast, near Moan City's high walls and gates. Sellen, who disliked crowds, had no real objection to the relocation, though she did grumble about having to walk farther to Haight Fortress for breakfast. The three military landmarks formed an inverted triangle. If Haight or the outpost were attacked, Moan City could dispatch troops rapidly, and any attack on Moan City would be noticed by the men at Haight or the outpost. Outside Moan City's walls, a golem guard, 10 meters tall and equipped with absurdly long-range detection, stood watch. Any orc that came near would quickly be spotted, and then unpleasantly dispatched by its enormous arrows. Tarns had not summoned the citizens of Moan City along with the buildings. For one thing, the Golden Tree had just absorbed almost all the souls from the orcs and wargs, and for another, Haight Fortress had already housed a dozen mouths since its summoning. Tarns did not want to recreate the food shortage the dwarves had only just begun to solve. Still, he believed he would not be starving long. Once the first crops matured, he could cultivate specialty plants from the lands between and trade them with the dwarves, especially to make alcohol. The dwarves loved their drink. Grain ripened under Golden Grace would, he thought, make a superior brew. He left the details of commerce to Kenneth Haight. After all, Kenneth had been summoned for exactly that reason. Tarns left the castle and found the Kingrick soldiers already posted along the walls and at the gate, accepted and adapting quickly, if in too small numbers. He sighed at the constant problems of manpower and provisions. Sellen's voice answered him from his right. "What are you sighing about?" He turned and saw her in her witch's gown, watching him as if she had been waiting. "Anything you need, Sellen?" he asked. She bobbed a nod. "Come with me to the basement. I have something to show you." She pointed toward the glowing golden tree. "It has to do with that." Tarns followed. The relay station's underground passage showed the tree-returning phenomenon had already taken place. Apart from marks where the Pumpkinhead soldiers had struck the walls, no trace of last night's massacre remained. Sellen's small room was bright with the azure glow of a source stone when she opened the door. She produced a deep blue crystal the size of her forearm and held it out. "Take this." Tarns felt the stone pulse as if it were a living thing, vein-like patterns moving faintly beneath its surface. He remembered the source stone he had once taken from his teacher, given, more accurately, from Sellen herself. Sellen laughed softly. "You remember the source stone I gave you, my disciple?" Tarns clutched the crystal. "Teacher, what is this? Are you—" Selin removed her witch's gown and interrupted with a smile. Don't leap to conclusions. This doesn't contain my soul. It's a blank slate, she explained calmly. From watching the corpses and the golden tree's rapid growth, she'd concluded a lot. The golden tree needed large amounts of souls to be converted into golden grace, which in turn summoned things from the lands between. But the tree returning effect only worked within the golden tree's influence. Beyond it, the souls of the dead simply dissipated. So she had crafted a variant of a source stone that could store souls with a very large capacity. She'd altered the sorcery inside so it could attract and absorb the souls of the departed, much like the golden tree, allowing Tarns to collect souls outside the golden tree's reach and bring them back. Name it yourself, she said. Tarns smiled and made the obvious choice. Soul Collector. With that, Tarns no longer had to worry that orc souls out in the wild would go to waste. Far away, for reasons they could not see, orcs shivered as though under a cold shadow. Selin raised an eyebrow at him, then and said mildly, Bring me breakfast. You've put the relay station and Hate Fortress too far apart. Even as Elden Lord, Tarns obeyed. He rode with Torridi back to Hate Fortress, where he found Keely in the square, looking dejected, and Feely trying to comfort him. Rogier stood behind them with a helpless expression. What's wrong? Tarnas asked. Feely and Keely straightened and saluted awkwardly. Rogier bowed and explained, They wanted to learn magic after you mentioned it, so I taught them the simplest source stone sorcery I could. Starlight. But it seems dwarves have no magic reserves. They can't cast at all. Tarns thought of Thorin's frozen shell axe and how invigorating battle skills had left him drained. Perhaps dwarves couldn't cast magic, but could use battle skills. He smiled at the hope in Keely's eyes. Fetch me breakfast from the kitchen, both of you, he said. Then come with me. I'll teach you myself. Please give recommendation tickets, monthly tickets, and rewards. In practice, Moan City's boundaries began at its walls, where the golem guards could reach. The game's map might not show all the civilian areas beyond the military zone, but from what Arena, the castle's daughter, suggested, Moan City held many commoners and nobles, and even a number of misbegotten, serving as enslaved labor. For the story, its territory is reasonably expanded, roughly comparable to River City in scale. Chapter 24, The Praying Dwarf. As expected. Tarns nodded as he looked at Keely, who had failed to cast a spell even after picking up the staff and was now sitting on the ground. After delivering breakfast to teacher Selin at the inn, he had taken Feely and Keely to an open space outside Moan City Castle. Curious about how dwarves of this world learned magic, Selin had followed with her breakfast. Seeing the dwarf who couldn't cast, she said, Disciple, are you running an experiment? One glance at them shows they don't have any magic. This isn't about talent. They're simply barred from the door of magic and can never enter. Why waste your effort teaching them? Although Selin's voice wasn't loud, it was enough for Feely and Keely to hear. Keely's face fell. Feely comforted him, then looked at Tarns. Mr. Tarns, Tarns answered. Teacher Selin isn't attacking you, Keely. She's stating a fact. I was just checking if you could use magic with a staff, and it looks like you truly can't. Keely slammed his fist on the ground in frustration. Tarns smiled at the outburst and said, But don't be discouraged. Just because you can't learn glintstone magic doesn't mean you can't learn prayers. Prayers? What's that? Keely shot his head up eagerly, and even Feely, who had been comforting him, leaned in. Selin, now intrigued, sat on the grass. She wanted to see whether her disciple could teach these two dwarves to use prayers. Theoretically, if someone had no magic at all, they shouldn't be able to cast prayers either. Tarns understood the principle. But during his time in the Blue Mountains, Thorin had been able to use the battle skill bound to a frozen shell axe normally, which suggested dwarves might be able to use battle skills, glintstone magic, or prayers without consuming conventional magic. Battle skills had since been shown to be usable by spending physical stamina. Glintstone magic seemed unusable without magic. That left prayers unverified. Even if Keely couldn't learn traditional magic, Tarns had already prepared a weapon that could unleash a battle skill as a reward for helping defeat the orcs last night. He looked at the eager dwarf brothers and produced two silver metal strips shaped like fingers, their ends fused together like a key ring. It was the Clawmark Seal, a basic catalyst for casting prayers, given to him by the Finger Maiden. Tarns held it tightly. Golden light leaked through his fingers and spread outwards in ripples, bathing Fili and Kili. Only when the last, brightest gleam subsided did he loosen his hand and show the Clawmark Seal resting in his palm. Kili blinked. "I feel full of energy now. All the fatigue from fighting last night's gone." Fili nodded. "Same here. My tiredness is completely gone." "Mr. Tarns, did you just do something?" Tarns smiled and shook the Clawmark Seal at them. "That was a small prayer of recovery. I restored your stamina. If you'd been injured, it would heal wounds too, but it looks like it only refreshed your endurance this time." Kili's eyes brightened, then clouded as he recalled failing with glintstone magic. "I hope I can learn this prayer." Tarnish shrugged and didn't explain too much. Instead, he asked, "Kili, do you prefer fighting up close or taking enemies out from afar?" Kili thought a moment and said decisively, "I like fighting shoulder to shoulder with a comrade. Hiding behind others and letting them shield me isn't my way." Tarnans was a little surprised. Kili was a good archer, so he'd expected Kili to choose ranged combat. He adjusted his plan. Mid to close range prayers would suit a dwarf. Tarns swapped the ancient dragon faith prayers he'd planned to teach for beast prayers. A thick beast-hide book appeared in his hand. As Fili and Kili glanced at it, they both felt a quick flash, like a beast's roar in their ears. In Tarnas's other hand materialized an oval gray pebble marked by 3 vicious claw gouges. The Clawmark Seal was one of the prayer catalysts Tarnas had used early on. In the lands between, he had traded this kind of catalyst with the beast clergyman Garang for Deathroot. Tarns was planning to teach a beast-type prayer. He chose beast prayers because their catalysts, like the Clawmark Seal, could amplify prayer power based on the user's strength. Tarns knew the dwarves were strong. If they learned beast prayers, they could use their physical power to compensate for lacking magic. He held up the beast-hide book, bounced it a few times, and said, "I hope you can understand the text, Kili. The hardest part of learning prayers is grasping the story behind each prayer so you can call it more effectively. Normally Gurang would have taught you orally, but he's not here, so this is my written record of beast prayers." Kili's excitement faded. Fili gently pinched him as a reminder not to be picky, then reached out for the book. "Sorry, Mr. Tarns," Fili said apologetically. "My brother isn't fond of reading." Tarns nodded. He could tell Kili wasn't a reader. Thorin had raised him to be free-spirited, unlike Fili, who'd been raised as a prince. "Can you understand the script in the book, Kili?" Tarnas asked. He had fixed Middle-earth's language problem with help from the One, but whether Middle-earth beings could interpret the lands between script was uncertain. Kili frowned and flipped through the pages, then nodded. "I don't recognize the characters, but when I look at them, their meanings come into my head." Good, the One's language patch worked. But Kili quickly made a puzzled face and pointed to a passage. "I know what the words say, but I don't understand what they mean together. What does it mean when it says beasts symbolize civilization? In my world, beasts mean bloodlust and savagery." Tarnas blinked, then understood. Kili could read the words, but the cultural context was missing. He needed an explanation of how beasts were perceived in the lands between. Tarns sat down on the grass beside Kili. "Let me explain. Fili, come closer if you want. If either of you has questions, ask." For the next hour, Tarns patiently answered their questions. Selen moved closer after finishing her breakfast. Though she wasn't skilled in prayers, she knew a lot about the lands between and helped fill gaps Tarns couldn't. As the sun climbed higher in a clear sky, the 4 of them talked until time slipped by unnoticed. Finally, about an hour later, Kili closed the book with a satisfied exhale. "This is probably the longest book I've ever read in my life," Selen said lightly. "If you sink into the ocean of knowledge, you'll find a day as short as morning dew." Kili waved his hands. No, I'd drown in that ocean." Tarns tossed the Clawmark Seal to Kili. "Since you think you've got it, try casting. Don't be afraid of failure. If you can't cast it, I've prepared a special weapon that can use its own battle skill." Kili caught the seal cleanly in midair. "I still want to try. You and Miss Selen have been so patient. I don't want to disappoint you." He handed the beast-hide book to Fili, stood up, and dusted his clothes. He took a deep breath, gripped the clawmark seal, and recalled the prayer's lore. Tarns urged Selen and Fili to step back to avoid accidental injury. Kili closed his eyes, inhaled, and with a low growl poured his stamina into the clawmark seal like a rising tide. His stance became that of a beast about to pounce. The arm holding the seal was a hooked claw. A creamy white light flared in his palm, and the faint outline of a beast's claw appeared. He swung upward. The light became a sharp claw-shaped shadow that cut the air and scored 5 deep claw marks through the grass, upturning earth and sending sod flying. "Ha! I did it! Mr. Tarn I really did it." Kili opened his eyes and stared at the clawmark seal in amazement, then knelt down like a curious child to inspect the marks he'd made. Applause broke out around him. Tarns clapped and genuinely looked pleased. "Kili, do you feel any pain anywhere?" he asked. Fili watched anxiously. Kili laughed and shook his head. "No, I feel fine. It only used some stamina. No big deal." Fili breathed out in relief, came over, and the brothers hugged in celebration. Selen cocked her head in curiosity. "Interesting. It uses stamina instead of magic? Why can't magic work that way?" Tarns considered and said, "Maybe that's the core difference between prayers and glintstone magic. Glintstone magic needs magic as its energy, while prayers are more like an act of conviction towards something. What fuels a prayer could be different things. That's my initial theory. I haven't worked out the details yet." Selen smiled faintly. "Very interesting. This world might not bore me after all." Tarns turned to Fili. "Do you want to try casting a prayer too? You've been studying the book." Kili handed the clawmark seal to Fili. "Yes, brother. You should try. It feels amazing." "All right." Fili took the catalyst, gave the book back to Kili, and stepped back. He channeled his energy and cast the beast claw prayer as well, leaving the grass even more chaotic. Kili pumped his fist. "I knew you could do it." Fili stared at the seal in disbelief, still processing what had happened. When Kili waved a hand in front of his face, Fili came out of it, pulled Kili up, and together they bowed deeply to Tarns and Selen. "I really don't know how to thank you," Fili said with earnest respect. "Words can't express how grateful we are, Mr. Tarns, Miss Selen. No, Teacher Tarns, Teacher Selen." Selen shook her head. "No need for teacher. I haven't taught you any real glintstone magic, only told a few stories. Save that title for my apprentice." Tarns grinned. "When we trade with the Dwarves of the Blue Mountains, give our golden tree some favorable terms." Fili straightened and nodded vigorously. "I'll explain everything in detail to Uncle Thorin." Kili beamed, then suddenly turned and squinted. "Why is Dwalin running over so fast?" Tarns looked and saw Dwalin barreling toward them, his dwarvish forehead tattoos gleaming, already panting before he was close. He shouted, "Mr. Tarns, it's incredible, truly incredible. The people I had sow seeds yesterday afternoon, their crops have already sprouted this morning." Dwalin's excitement was contagious. The dwarves were learning to use things from the lands between to strengthen themselves, not simply relying on Tarns to protect them, like a mother hen with chicks. Please recommend tickets and monthly subscriptions. Everyone can see the author intends the dwarves to use the Lands Between's tools to improve their own abilities, rather than having the protagonist coddle them. Chapter 25, Unexpected Visitors. Selen wasn't paying much attention to Dwalin's words. After Tarns, Fili, and Kili finished bidding farewell to her, Dwalin led them toward the land set aside as a farm. 2 Godric soldiers in armor, brass shields and longswords at their sides, walked the ridges of the fields, eyes scanning the horizon. On the carefully tilled black soil, new shoots had broken through. Their tiny green leaves shimmered faintly under the golden tree's light, each leaf giving off a soft glow. 3 dwarves in worn straw hats crouched at the edge of the fields, staring at the sprouts with a mixture of disbelief and hope. Their beards trembled as they gasped, and rough hands gently sifted the soil around the shoots, as if to prove they were real. The air smelled of earth and spring, and they whispered to one another. "By Durin, these sprouts look larger than they did a moment ago," the dwarf with the long red beard said, rubbing his eyes in astonishment. The 2 with him, one with a pale, long beard, the other bearing a resemblance to the older dwarf, nodded. Tarns had just arrived and overheard them. If not for the voice, he might have thought Gloin had come over. Most dwarves looked much the same to him, except for the particularly handsome ones like Fili, Kili, and Thorin, so he usually relied on beard length, color, hair, and voice. Dwalin strode up with a booming laugh. Master Tarns is here. Ask him whatever you need. The three dwarves rose and bowed together. Lord Tarnas. They then turned to Fili and Kili. Good morning, Lord Fili, Lord Kili. Fili and Kili smiled and returned the greeting, stepping aside to give them room. While they exchanged pleasantries, Tarns took in the layout of the farm. The crops were planted in separate plots: potatoes, carrots, corn, and wooden signs in ornate common script named each crop so his people wouldn't get mixed up. The red-bearded dwarf stepped forward and spoke in a deep voice. Master Tarns, did you cast a spell on these fields? These seeds shouldn't have sprouted so fast. Corn usually takes at least 3 days to show, but it was planted only last night. And all the other crops have sprouted too. He paused, then added, What surprises me most is that every seed we planted has come up, 100% germination, no sickly seedlings. I've never seen a farmer's field like this in my life. Tarns was not surprised. The golden grace of the golden tree improved soil and promoted growth. Such miracles were its byproducts. He pointed toward the golden tree standing inside Moan City's castle and smiled. I didn't cast any spells. The golden tree has bestowed a bit of golden grace on the land. The red-bearded dwarf peered in the direction Tarns indicated and murmured, Oh, of course, I'd forgotten about the sacred tree you brought. It truly is miraculous. Tarns thought of many miracles the golden tree held. He also knew, quietly and cautiously, that accepting golden grace could lengthen a life substantially. He chose not to say that aloud. He had seen how desperate shorter-lived peoples could be for even a whisper of longevity. He also knew the races of Middle-earth well enough to understand the consequences. Elves were effectively immortal. Most humans lived less than 100 years, and the Dunedain lived far longer, over 200 years in some cases. If word spread that the golden grace extended human life, trouble would follow. He steered the conversation back to the farm. From your experience, how long do you think these crops will take to mature? The red-bearded dwarf scratched his head. Honestly, Master Tarns, I don't know. They're growing faster than anything I've seen. My old measures don't apply. Tarnas nodded. Then he turned to Fili. Fili, why don't you stay here a few more days? Have them record observations until the first harvest. That data will make it much easier for my people to reclaim new land. Fili brightened. Of course, Teacher Tarnas. Kili and I also want to learn more about the prayers from you and Lady Selen. That's perfect. Dwalin raised an eyebrow at Fili, calling Tarnes teacher, but said nothing. The red-bearded dwarf added, There are some other special things at the farm. You should see them. Led by Dwalin, Tarns walked to the animal pens. The livestock, sluggish from a long journey, had quickly revived under the golden tree's influence. 2 dairy cows were already producing fresh milk. The golden tree is amazing, chuckled the man in charge of the cows, carrying a wooden pail that smelled of milk. Golden flecks danced on the milk's surface. I mixed some of the golden grass I harvested yesterday with the fodder we brought, and look. The dwarf who tended the sheep, black-bearded, grinned. Same here. I fed the sheep a mix of golden grass with ryegrass and clover. At first they bleated like they were given dry straw, but after the first bite they started picking out the golden stuff. Some of their wool is already turning golden at the roots. Master Tarns, that wool'll fetch a fine price. The chicken keeper, stroking a thick brown beard, admitted, My chickens haven't changed much. No golden milk, no golden feathers, just livelier. Maybe you fed them the same feed from the Blue Mountains, the cowkeeper suggested. Things like bean cakes and crushed peanuts. Naturally, chickens don't eat grass. And some hens are for eggs, so I can't stuff them full. If I weren't worried it'd be wasteful, I'd chop up some meat and mix it in, then those eggs be top quality. The chicken keeper laughed and shrugged. Tarns chatted for a few moments longer, though he didn't understand all the details. What mattered was that both crops and animals were thriving under the golden grace. A week passed. There were no orc raids, only good news. The seeds planted 7 days earlier had all matured. Tomatoes hung like ruby gems, translucent and bursting with juice. Wheat stood golden and full, its ears heavy with grain. Corn cobs swelled inside green husks streaked with gold. Potatoes and carrots were enormous, 2 size notches larger than those from the Blue Mountains. Tarns walked the field paths amid laughter and celebration. The dwarves' faces and beards were smeared with dirt, but their eyes shone with the simple joy of harvest. They told him the soil had not been exhausted by the rapid growth and could be planted again. Keely bit into a bright, juicy tomato and grinned. Delicious. Feely held a tomato larger than his palm and asked happily, Master Tarns, may I take some of these back for Uncle Thorin to taste? Tarns laughed. I have no reason to refuse, Feely. The dwarves gathered and sang, Praise the Golden Tree. Tarns felt the worry he had carried about food ease with their laughter. 2 days later, another surprise came from the farm, this time from the chicken coop. The golden tree and the sun lit the ripening fields, waves of golden wheat swaying in the breeze. In the coop, plump white hens scratched at feed. One hen strutted and, with an imperious cluck, dropped an egg. The shell caught the sunlight and gleamed faintly gold. Durin's beard, little darling, you've laid a golden egg, the chicken keeper cried. He scooped up the egg and ran to the soldiers outside the farm. By the time Tarns reached the coop, a small wooden basin sat full of golden-shelled eggs. The chicken keeper had already lit a fire and was frying eggs. 2 broken shells lay discarded at his feet. Master Tarnas, he said, ladling a fried egg onto a plate and offering it. I've said it before, but the golden tree is wondrous. Want to try one? They taste excellent. Tarnas shook his head. I already had breakfast. Is there any difference from ordinary eggs? The dwarf belched, embarrassed, and then rubbed his hands. Taste-wise, not really, but after eating these golden eggs, I feel warm all over and unusually full. He belched again. I only ate 2, and I'm already burping like this. He pushed the plate toward Tarns with a pair of wooden chopsticks. I can't eat more. You should try it yourself. Tarns accepted the chopsticks and lifted a piece of egg to his mouth. Before he could taste it, a shouted voice came from outside. Tarnas, your majesty. Are you Tarns, your majesty? Are you here? Kenneth Haight panted as he ran up to the farmyard by the chicken coop. Tarns swallowed the mouthful and stood. I'm here. What is it, Kenneth? Kenneth bent over, hands on his knees, catching his breath. Master Tarnas, a well-equipped cavalry has appeared outside Haight's fort. Cavalry? Orcs? Tarnas' expression shifted to alertness. No, not orcs. They're human and very graceful, but their ears are long and pointed. The man leading them introduced himself as Elrond, Lord of Rivendell. He came under Gandalf's recommendation and wishes to meet the Lord of the Golden Tree. Elves, Tarnas nodded. I will come with you. Chapter 26, Elrond's Request. After Tarns had walked away, the dwarf who'd been eavesdropping in the kitchen finally twigged that someone had mentioned long, pointed ears. Without setting down his crude frying pan, he sprinted for Moan City. I can't just let my friends be bullied by those pointy ears, he muttered as he ran. At Haight Fort, over a dozen Godric soldiers stood in formation on the wall, looking down. A cluster of demi-humans crowded the outer platform where ballistae were stationed, whispering about the cavalry outside the fort, but not aiming their weapons. At the gate beneath them, a Godric knight, his armor spattered with old blood, stood as if frozen in place, flanked by 2 soldiers. Less than 10 paces ahead rode a striking elf on a powerful warhorse. Dozens more elves sat motionless behind him on dark steeds, wearing fitted silver armor and reddish-brown cloaks. They waited quietly, as if for the true master of Haight Fort to arrive. Behind the cavalry, 10 carriages pressed the mud into deep ruts. They were clearly full of supplies. When Tarns and Kenneth came into view, the leading elf dismounted and smiled warmly at them. Greetings, friend of Gandalf. I am Elrond, Lord of Rivendell. Mithrandir, Gandalf, told me when he visited Rivendell not long ago that a kind-hearted man was rebuilding his home in this scarred land of Minheriath. He hoped I might lend a hand. I have come rather abruptly, and I hope you will accept my help. Tarnan studied the elf who called himself Elrond. His face bore neither the gauntness of extreme age nor the freshness of youth, but was marked by many joys and sorrows. Dark hair framed gray eyes, and a silver circlet rested on his brow. Tarns felt instinctively that this was not only a lord, but a seasoned and honorable warrior. He stepped forward. I am Tarnas. Welcome. Kenneth Haight stepped up with him and signaled the fort's soldiers to stand down. A friend of Gandalf is a friend of mine. Thank you for coming all this way. Tarnas offered his hand. Elrond made a small, unfamiliar gesture, paused as if unsure, and then took the outstretched hand. Tarnas thought perhaps the elf wasn't used to human handshakes. He shook lightly and released it. Elrond's mouth twitched into an apologetic smile. It's been a long time since I last dealt with humans. I almost forgot your handshake etiquette. That mystery cleared. Tarns invited them to Moen City. As they rode, Elrond's bright eyes swept the golden grasslands and up to the dazzling golden tree. This tree is exactly as Gandalf described, powerful and full of life. It's hard not to be delighted, he said. Elrond plainly felt the blessings the tree scattered from its branches and leaves, which explained his admiration. Tarn smiled. Everyone who sees it says the same, but it's still growing. When it becomes a true tower of a tree, I'll invite you to visit again. Their conversation was cut short by a rough shout. Protect Teacher Tarnas! A band of dwarves burst from the roadside woods, armed with swords, spears, halberds, and in some cases pots and pans. Keely's voice led the charge from the front, whooping aloud, and Dwalin thundered behind him, swinging a battle axe. The elf knights around Elrond reacted instantly, spurring their horses to form a protective ring around the lord. Elrond watched the ragged charge with puzzled amusement. When he saw some dwarves brandishing oil-streaked frying pans and carrying the look of farmers and cooks, his puzzlement deepened. Lord Tarnas, these dwarves are... he asked. Tarnas saw the dwarves barreling toward them, faces tense with worry, and for an instant he wanted to ignore them. He couldn't. Keely's prayer charm was glowing in his hand, and Fili already had a throwing knife poised. Tarnans called out sharply, Fili, Kili, stop! Lord Elrond is not here to fight! Kili froze. Huh? Fili loosened his grip on the knife, bewildered by the armed elven cavalry. The rest of the dwarves halted too. The little chicken-raising dwarf, who had run most of the way, looked sheepish, glancing left and right. I thought I heard elf cavalry outside Hate Fort. I figured there'd be a fight. Fili, Kili, and Dwalin's faces fell when they saw the 10 carriages of supplies following the elves. Their distrust of elves ran deep. Though they'd been in the wrong, none of them offered an apology. Elrond ordered his riders to stand down in Elvish, then stepped forward with Tarns to address the dwarves. Prejudice is an invisible mountain, Elrond said evenly. It can keep you from distinguishing friend from foe and lead you into blindness and danger. Keely snorted. We don't want to be friends with a bunch of ungrateful elves. Dwalin kept his axe raised in a provocatively defiant posture. Fili, more restrained, tugged his brother back and spoke to Tarns instead. Sorry, teacher. We heard pointy ears at your gate and thought trouble was coming. Tarns diffused them quickly. Thank you for looking out for me. Go to Hatefort and rest. Fili cast a few suspicious looks at Elrond before nodding. Kili snorted once more and followed his brother. Dwalin hefted his axe a few times as he passed near the elves, deliberately letting a cold stare linger. The other dwarves muttered and grunted their discontent as they walked by. Only after they'd passed out of sight did Tarns give a pained, apologetic look to Elrond. I am truly sorry, Lord Elrond. I didn't expect such a foolish misunderstanding. Once we reach the castle in Moen City, I will personally apologize to you and your people. Elrond only smiled. It was a harmless misunderstanding. No need for a Golden Tree Lord to kneel and apologize. I understand the stubbornness of dwarves, hard as winter ice. The fact that they listen to you shows how much they respect you. It confirms what Gandalf said, you are someone worth befriending. Tarnas, surprised by the praise, felt a little embarrassed but admiring of Elrond's composure. You are gracious, but Gandalf's praise is a bit much. Let's continue. This is no place for lingering. Elrond's smile didn't falter. Someone who casually gives a divine weapon to a friend is hardly overrated by Gandalf. They rode into Moen City's inner castle. Nefeli, Lu, and Rogier had been waiting at the main gate, helping the elves stable their horses and park the supply wagons. Tarns introduced them. The warrior who summons storms, Nefeli Lu. The swordsman who blends swordplay and glintstone magic, Rogier. Gandalf has told me of your prowess. I'm glad to finally meet you. Elrond greeted them politely. Rogier removed his pointed sorcerer's hat and bowed with a hand to his breast. Nefeli looked him over with a nod. May the wind bless your journey home, she said. They reached the City Lord Hall, a wide chamber with 3 long, clean tables that could seat 50. At that moment, however, the tables were bare. "I've already arranged for Kenneth Haight to send food," Tarnas apologized. "Lord Elrond, please excuse the delay. And this is my first time hosting elves. Any dietary restrictions?" Elrond took the seat of honor. The other elves sat in orderly fashion. "No matter. Our unannounced arrival prevented you from preparing. I should be the one to apologize. Normal human food will be fine." Tarnas asked the question he'd been expecting. "Lord Elrond, you've come a long way from Rivendell. It can't be only about delivering supplies, can it?" Elrond smiled as if relieved that Tarnas understood. "You're right. There are other reasons, plans Gandalf and I discussed." "Why does this keep going back to Gandalf?" Tarnas wondered, but invited Elrond to speak. Elrond nodded to an attendant. "Lindir, bring the map." An elegant male elf rose, unfolded a fresh map, and laid it on Tarn's table. The ink still looked newly dried and the script neat. Elrond pointed to a spot in the upper right of Minheriath marked Shabard. Tarnas leaned closer. "What's there?" Elrond explained was once a great riverport city, able to host sea vessels. The Shabard Bridge linked the north and south roads and connected Arnor to Gondor. Now Arnor is gone, Gondor is weakened, and the Great Plague took many in western Middle-earth. Shabard has fallen into ruin, eroded earthworks, ruined towns, a collapsed bridge, and dangerous shoals. Tarns listened. "How does this tie into your and Gandalf's plans?" Elrond met Tarna's eyes. "I want to ask you to rebuild Shabard." Tarnas was taken aback but didn't answer immediately. Elrond let him consider before continuing. "Darkness never fully left this land, Tarns. It waits in places we can't see, ready to strike when we're weakest. Shabard's location is strategic. If you lead your people to rebuild that port, you'd restore a fast link from Rivendell to Gondor. The Blue Mountains dwarves could reach Moria and reclaim old holds more easily. It would be a regional hub. Rebuilding Shabard won't be simple," Elrond added. "If you refuse, that's your right. If you accept, as Lord of Rivendell, I swear to support your work." Tarnans thought it through. He could see the military logic, preparing for possible war. But even in peace, a rebuilt Shabard could become a thriving transport hub and bring him many benefits. Elrond read his expression and sighed a little. War has never truly left this land. Gandalf and I only wish to prepare as much as possible during this fragile peace. At that moment, Kenneth Haight nudged the hall door. The bronze ring clanged, and Godric's soldiers entered, bearing trays piled with food, golden fried eggs, bright red jam, vibrant salads, and cooling wine. The small banquet provided a welcome pause. Tarnas used the pause to answer. "Lord Elrond, I'll need time to think. Gandalf once suggested the Limgrave Great Bridge as another possibility, also abandoned, but useful to reconnect with southern Gondor. I've only just begun rebuilding my home. I really need time." Elrond inclined his head. "I understand. We do not mean to pressure you. Gandalf and I merely offer a suggestion. If you choose not to rebuild Shabard, we will not be disappointed. I am simply glad to see Minheriath revived because of you." After 3 days as a guest, Elrond announced it was time to return to Rivendell. Not all the elves would go back with him. He left a few behind, ostensibly to help rebuild Tarns' homeland. Outside Hyde Fortress, on the road the elves had taken, Tarns stepped forward to thank him. "Thank you for your help these past days, Elrond," he said. Elrond smiled. "The supplies were nothing. After seeing the true magic of the Golden Tree, I believe you'll rebuild your home soon. I look forward to the day you visit Rivendell, Tarnans." Over those 3 days, they had talked easily. Tarnas admired Elrond's poise, insight, and patience, qualities that had been tested by dwarves who sometimes made trouble for the elves. Elrond took it in stride. He even asked if the farms where the dwarves worked needed elvish aid. Fili and the others had refused help outright, and Elrond only smiled at their stubbornness. "When you've lived as long as I have, you come to find young, stubborn dwarves endearingly childlike," Elrond had remarked. It was clear he found their antics charming rather than vexing. Tarns, for his part, appreciated Elrond's straightforwardness. By the end of their visit, they no longer addressed each other with formal titles. "Believe me, Elrond," Tarns said, smiling. "You'll see. That day will come soon. Next time, I'll bring 10 times what you gave us." "You needn't bring gifts. Rivendell welcomes you," Elrond replied, holding out his hand. By human custom, farewells include a handshake, do they not? Tarns hesitated, then took the offered hand. If it's someone closer, though. He stepped forward and embraced Elrond, patting his back once. The elves behind them, led by Lindir, blinked in surprise before struggling not to laugh. Elrond himself wore a bemused expression. There's much I must learn about human customs, he said, but this is not unpleasant. Moments of joy are fleeting, and farewells must come, Elrond added, but our friendship endures, witnessed by the Valar. Tarns produced a slender golden longsword from his spatial pack. A witness should be something memorable. Elrond, take this sword as a testament to the friendship between the Golden Tree and Rivendell. The blade gleamed like flowing molten gold. Its hilt bore exquisite carvings, details that spoke of a master craftsman. Elrond's eyes lit with surprise as he took it, feeling its warmth and the paradoxical weight of history in something so light. He sheathed the noble's estoc at his waist and grinned. Gandalf called you a sword giver, Elrond said. I didn't know why before, but I do now. Tarnas raised an eyebrow. Gandalf gave me that title? I'll ask him about it next time I see him. Elrond swung onto his horse. Perhaps you will. Wizards are unpredictable. Farewell, my friend. The elves sounded their horns in unison, a clear, high melody like a mountain spring, carrying their pride and sadness. Then they rode beyond the horizon. Tarn stayed until they were completely out of sight. At Moan City's gates, he found Fili and Kili waiting. You should have been with them, Tarna said. Why are you here? Have those pointy ears left? Kili asked bluntly. Fili shoved him and then answered, Teacher Tarnas, we came to say goodbye to you too. You've been away from the Blue Mountains over half a month, Tarns said. If you don't go back soon, Thorin will start pacing. We were planning to leave today, Fili admitted, but we saw you go to say farewell to the elves, so we waited. Dwalin poked his bald head out of the gate laden with parcels. I'm here, Mr. Tarns, he rumbled. Inside the gate, the dwarven caravan waited. Where 7 carriages had arrived, only 3 remained. 5 dwarves were missing. Tarns's look of doubt prompted Dwalin to explain. The others stayed behind. We had many carriages because we brought livestock and food. Now we don't need so many. We gave the spare carriages to you, Mr. Tarns. We left a stable hand to watch the horses, and some of our kin who managed the farms decided to remain. They couldn't leave. Tarns nodded. Those first days you spent here sped up the Golden Tree's reconstruction. I owe you all a debt. Fili, Kili, and Dwalin smiled openly, their faces warmed by the Golden Tree's light. The 3 climbed into an oak carriage. The wheels creaked, hooves rang on the stone road as the convoy moved through Moan City's gate. Tarns watched until their figures rounded the corner, then summoned Torride and called, Fili, Dwalin, catch this. He flung 3 items from his spatial pack. The dwarves caught them, surprised. Fili held another clawmark seal. Kili and Dwalin each had a red amber medallion. Fili, you won't have to fight over catalysts now, Tarns said. Kili, Dwalin, these medallions will help keep you healthy. Be careful on the road. Next time you come, I promise this place will be different. You'll see the Golden Tree's true form. And remember, he added, the foundation of prayers is faith. What you learn here comes from the stories of the lands between, but your own dwarven legends may inspire new prayers of your own. Believe in them. Understood, Teacher Tarns, they chorused. Dwalin stood on the carriage and bowed solemnly. Torrida began to move. Tarns rode beside it as the dwarves waved and sang as they left. When the carriage disappeared, a hush settled over the gate. The song and laughter were gone. Only the city's banner, bearing the Golden Tree, and fluttered in the breeze. Tarns forced a small smile. Partings were temporary. There was much left to do. He set off into the fields. Golden crops rolled on either side of the road, and livestock grazed lazily. A breeze rippled the wheat like a golden sea. In the distance he heard voices, cheerful singing and laughter from the dwarves and elves who remained, and his step lightened. The voices, however, soon blurred into heated argument. Tarns paused. Whenever dwarves and elves gathered, tempers flared. They seemed naturally ill-suited to one another. He had yet to see such bickering in the lands between. There they might simply draw swords. He was about to step in when another voice called out. Nefili Lux was already mediating between them. Tarns inwardly thanked her and quickened his pace toward the Golden Tree. The golden tree had accumulated many blessings and was already capable of summoning. Tarns did not plan to summon grand edifices. Legendary citadels like Stormvale were still beyond reach, but he could call up settlements on the scale of Moen City, and more importantly, inhabitants. He intended to summon nobles, commoners, trolls, misbegotten, demi-humans, and even the giant ants that dwelt underground in the lands between. He had learned the ants were frightening in appearance, but simple-minded and well-suited to hard labor. The Noxians, who had used them as mounts, used magic to control them. If dismounted, the ants attacked the Noxians first. Tarns believed he might be able to communicate with these ants and put them to work. To be cautious, he would first summon ordinary residents and try summoning a giant ant to test communication. He also planned to call some of the Kingric royal army as a garrison supplement and bring in old friends. There were many places he now felt compelled to visit, and he would need more hands to help him. Chapter 28, Reunion. Oh my goodness, I really can't stand you dwarves. You're more stubborn than the stepping stones under my dining table. I told you cabbage won't grow well here. This field has already been planted with so many crops by you. If you keep putting cabbage in it, you'll just exhaust the soil. Don't your burly dwarf brains know anything about planting density? The handsome elf in a brown robe had lost some of his usual elegance, at clutching the seeds he'd brought from Rivendell to his chest. Down on the field, the red-bearded dwarf in charge heard the elf's lecture, exchanged amused looks with the two dwarves at his side, and burst out laughing. Ha! Did you see that, lads? This pointy-eared fellow actually doubts our farming methods. He doesn't know how magical the Golden Tree's land is. He's still clinging to his pathetic ideas and won't listen to reason. Exactly. If you ask me, these pointy-eared ones are the stubborn ones. We discovered the land's magic right away. Nephili Lugs rubbed her forehead, feeling a headache coming on. Mr. Elf, how about this? Put aside some of your seeds for the dwarves to try, and keep some to plant the way you want. The elf shook his head emphatically. In a clear, melodious voice, he said, I appreciate the offer, Lady Nephili Lu, but I can't trust the dwarves. These are high-quality cultivars the Lord specifically asked me to select. If even one seed fails to sprout because of improper care, I'd be heartbroken. The dwarves erupted into argument again. Outside Moen City Castle, the elf and the dwarves, quarreling over how to plant vegetables, suddenly noticed the castle growing busy. People were streaming out of the main gate. Some wore fine brocades, others plain cloth. There were also humanoids among them, some scaled, some winged, walking with long, thick tails trailing behind. They weren't orcs. Both the clothed people and the long-tailed folk moved purposefully, but they kept to opposite sides as if wary of one another. The elf, with his keen sight, noticed that whether noble or long-tailed, their eyes shone gold, the same light as the golden tree. When Tarn summoned the residents of the lands between and the misbegotten, strands of golden light had fallen from the tree's branches. Its grace entered each body equally. That was why the misbegotten had calmed, and why the nobles and commoners accepted the summons. The rebellion in Moen City had many suspicious elements and involved the machinations of mad flame followers. Yes, but at its root, the misbegotten revolted because they had been treated like slaves subjected to inhuman cruelty. By bestowing the golden grace equally, Tarns recognized the misbegotten as commoners under the tree's protection, not as beasts to be slaughtered. Those who already revered the golden tree as their faith dared not oppose a man who could command it. Tarnies knew, however, that words alone could not erase centuries of bitter conflict. Peace now held only because the nobles and townsfolk felt his pressure. He did not foolishly force the two groups to live side by side. He separated them into different plots of land. This long-standing hostility needed time to wear down. His immediate duty was to minimize provocations. Sure enough, after leaving the gate, the two groups split left and right. The clothed people to the right, the long-tailed to the left. Behind them marched a 100-man unit of the king's army, led by 2 Godric knights. But roughly 80% were auxiliaries, white undergarments with chainmail shoulder capes and round helmets, lacking Godric's green and gold insignia. They carried short daggers and poorer gear. Auxiliaries weren't regular troops. Their main tasks were guard work, hauling supplies, manning ballistae and supporting the army. Now they could also help tend fields and herd livestock. Nephili, mediating the earlier quarrel, quickly understood what was happening. Tarns had summoned residents and misbegotten and called the king's army. She opened her mouth as if to explain, but the elf and the dwarves were only curious about the procession's faces. They had no questions about why the castle could keep producing people. Everything unfamiliar in the Golden Tree's realm was simply another gadget of the wizard to them. After so long living here, they no longer found the miraculous strange. Nephili smiled and let the thought drop. The arguing halted. The elf bowed to Nephili, then went toward his kin. The dwarves hurried off toward their farmhouses. "Wait, what are you going to do?" Nephili asked. The elf stopped, turned, and bowed. Tarn's kin have traveled far. They'll need good food and clean spring water. Without looking back, the red-bearded dwarf shouted, "Just spring water? Pointy-eared thinking is beyond us. We'll bring them fine wine and milk, steaming roasted meat. There'll be a grand feast tonight. We'll drink until we drop." The elf's mouth twitched at the dwarf's exuberance. He bowed again to Nephili before departing. A banquet, Nephili thought, watching the two groups move apart. She suspected the evening would be more strained than the dwarves imagined. In the castle's golden light, Tarn stood on the open lawn with several others arrayed about him, as if on either side of an invisible dividing line. There was Edgar, the city lord in silver armor, with his blind daughter Irina sheltered behind him. Opposite them stood a lion hybrid with flaming red fur and a leonine face, and a hunched, broad-shouldered, scaled misbegotten, Hugh the blacksmith, clutching an iron hammer. Beside Tarns was a man in gold and silver armor, hands sunk into a golden greatsword planted in the grass. D, the hunter of death, Rogier's good friend Darian. Hugh crouched protectively over a small girl in a red hood with golden hair, Roderica, who tuned spirits for Tarns at the round table hold. Hugh glowered at Edgar. Edgar glowered back. Roderica, seeing the tension, placed a hand to her chest. "Tarnished, what's happening?" I feel many memories coming back to me." Simultaneously, Edgar, Irina, Hugh, and Darian all pressed their hands to their foreheads. The lion hybrid, unbothered, watched them wonderingly and leaned to support Hugh when the smith swayed in pain. Roderica, however, recovered first. Her clear emerald eyes began to glow golden as the golden grace returned to her. She looked at Tarns with reverence and a sudden ache. "Tarnished, you've done so much." Tarnis smiled that familiar smile. "Roderica, welcome. You might be busy, spirit tuning, or rather, clerical work. Kenneth Haight will explain. He's overwhelmed. Do you know him?" "Good." Roderica blinked at the change of job title but accepted it at once. She trusted the Tarnished. With so many residents summoned, Kenneth would need help. Tarnas had planned ahead. Edgar and Irina snapped out of their memory fog. Edgar's first instinct was to embrace his daughter, but his armor made him hesitate. Tarnas caught the moment and stepped forward, passing the lion hybrid, who bowed slightly. "Wise and benevolent Elden Lord," the lion hybrid said with sincere deference. Tarnas inclined his head and stopped before Edgar and Irina. Clearing his throat, he said, "Edgar, I need to examine Irina." Edgar stiffened. He knew, some memory told him, that Tarns had become the Elden Lord. He could not disobey, but his love for his daughter made him stand between them. Tarns watched Edgar's hesitation, then produced a king's army straight sword from his spatial pack, placing the cold edge against Edgar's throat. He sighed softly and spoke sternly. "Edgar, you've recovered your memories. You know the danger of the mad flame. I have no tolerance for it. But I promise you this. If the mad flame witch is not dwelling in Irina, she will be unharmed. I will find her light work." Edgar's legs gave out. He sank to his knees on the golden grass. The grass didn't mark him, but his body seemed drained of strength as he bowed, the sound ringing beneath the tranquil tree. A bloodstain had darkened his forehead, each drop a bitter blossom in the golden light. He raised his head, lips trembling, voice ragged with a sob. "Tarnas, your majesty, Irina could never be a minion of the mad flame. She is so kind, even to the misbegotten." Tarnas's face did not change. He looked at the blind, frightened Irina and spoke quietly. "Irina might not be, but that does not mean the mad flame has not planted a seed. I had a friend named Yura once. When I was weak, he stood in front of a powerful bloodfinger that hunted Tarnished for me. He charged with me against a dragon. In the end, he died fighting an untainted, pure purple Bloodfinger. He inhaled deeply, looking at Edgar with a sorrowful, controlled anger. You may wonder why I mention him. At some point, a minion of the Mad Flame, Shabriri, took root inside his body. After Yura fell, this shameless Mad Flame minion lived on in his corpse. And you must remember that after your daughter's death, a Mad Flame witch named Hyetta appeared, resembling her in face and voice. Edgar, I cannot believe a knight who's guarded Moan City for years would not see through such a conspiracy, even if madness once clouded you. Irina's voice was small and tremulous. From your voice, are you the kindly Tarnished who once helped me deliver a letter to my father? Tarns watched her groping hand move toward her father, then nodded. Yes, that was me, but things happened afterward. I must check whether any sign of the Mad Flame remains within you. I'm sorry, but I will not stop this examination. It's important. Irina squeezed Edgar's hand and in her soft way steadied him. I knew the Tarnished was kind from his willingness to carry my letter. I cannot see, but I can hear that your voice carries sorrow and anger. You've been hurt by the Mad Flame you mentioned. Do as you must. You may examine me. Edgar clutched Irina's hand more tightly and murmured her name. She felt his presence and reassured him with a gentle, "It's all right, father. The Tarnished was the only one willing to help a blind girl. He did not bully me. I trust him. Begin, Tarnished," she added, turning toward him. At Tarns's command, golden grace flowed from the tree into Irina. He brought forth a prayer catalyst and cast the Golden Order fundamental prayer, regression, a prayer that removes mimicry and reveals true forms. Golden radiance emanated from him and into her. Irina's body remained unchanged. No mark of Mad Flame bloomed. Tarnis looked to her and to the anxious Edgar. Calmly, he said, "The examination is complete, Irina. Your body is clean." Relief broke through Edgar. He collapsed onto the golden grass in a flood of gratitude. Tarns's voice softened as he looked at the kind girl, caught by such a cruel conspiracy. "Irina, remove the cloth that binds your eyes. As a reward for your willingness, I will grant you sight." Warmth surged into Irina. She felt it flood to the places that had known only darkness. Edgar watched the golden grace envelop his daughter. Then Tarns turned and walked toward Dee, leaving father and daughter their reunion. The darkness before Irina felt thick as ink, pressing on her sight, but tendrils of golden light began to bloom until light filled her world. She then realized something blocked it, the cloth wrapped around her eyes. Trembling, she lifted it away. "Father?" she breathed, eyes newly bright and golden. She found the middle-aged knight before her and called to him instinctively, comforted by the familiar aura she had known even without sight. Edgar rose and embraced her, overwhelmed. Dee, walking toward Tarns, glanced at the reunion and commented dryly, "You've made quite the reunion, but I never expected that weak Tarnished, would become the Elden Lord. That surprises me." Tarns smiled. "It's not just Edgar and Irina reuniting. You have an old friend to meet as well." Dee looked puzzled until he followed Tarns's gaze beyond him. Tarns called loudly to a sorcerer lingering at the edge of the gathering, hesitant to approach. "Rogier, how much longer are you going to stand there? Thank you for 3,000 bookmarks. Thank you to all readers for your recommendation tickets, monthly passes, and tips. Irina truly has no hidden tricks. There's no Mad Flame hiding inside her. I don't like writing those sorts of twists. I summoned this father and daughter simply to reunite them. In the lands between, the daughter died tragically and the father went mad with grief. In my version, Irina is an innocent caught in a conspiracy. If you suspect something else, blame Hyetta. I also won't randomly ship characters. Between men and men, women and women, I prefer noble friendship or camaraderie. There are deeper conflicts among the native people of the lands between, the misbegotten and demi-humans, prejudices and hostilities we all know from the game. How to resolve those is what I want to portray, not a fairy tale happy ending written in a single stroke. Of course, I won't make it needlessly dark or preachy either. Reading should be relaxing. Laughter, ordinary moments of warmth, and a simple story are enough. Thank you again for your support. Please vote with recommendation tickets, monthly passes, and tips. Chapter 29, Rogier and Dee. "Ha, Rogier!" Darian murmured, then turned to watch his once close friend walk toward them step by step. After a brief silence, he added, How much longer are you going to dawdle? Rogier finally picked up his pace and jogged over. He took off his sorcerer's pointed hat with a slightly awkward expression and greeted Dee. Long time no see, Darian. Dee shot him a sarcastic look. So now you know how to greet me? When you stopped me from hunting those who live in death, your tone wasn't this friendly. Tarns had expected Rogier to be angry, but the other man only gave a faint smile. When you carried me, unable to move, from the depths of Stormvale Castle back to Round Table Hold, you didn't complain then either. Dee snapped back, because I couldn't stand someone being foolish enough to die from touching the Prince of Death's remains. They kept bickering like that, Dee scolding, Rogier replying with calm politeness. Their easy banter made Tarns feel conspicuously out of place. He cleared his throat and interrupted. Let me cut in on your reunion for a moment. I actually have a task for both of you. Dee stopped his verbal assault and faced Tarns. All right, since you have become Elden Lord and have not betrayed the Golden Order, I am very willing to obey your command. Tarns thought of choices he had made in past cycles, some betrayals of the Golden Order, and hid the guilty feeling behind a serious tone. I need you and Rogier to travel together to an abandoned port called Takrundale and investigate what's happening there and along the route. If there are no problems, that place will become part of our territory. This is no longer the lands between. D. Rogier arrived half a month earlier than you. He's quite familiar with this world and will explain the basics on the way. At the mention of expanding the Golden Tree's domain, Dee agreed without hesitation. I'm very willing to expand territory for the Golden Order. Tarns glanced at Rogier, who nodded, then looked to Dee with a hint of unease. You two, will you be all right? Rogier put his hat back on and smiled faintly. Though Darian can be stubborn, he separates duty from private matters. He won't let personal feelings ruin the task. Dee returned the jab. Rest assured, Lord Tarns, I will carry out your orders and keep a close eye on Rogier, lest he get distracted by oddities along the way. Rogier only shrugged. Satisfied, Tarns relaxed a little. Good. We leave tomorrow morning. Tonight there will be a welcoming banquet for you. I've arranged for provisions and other travel supplies. Rogier extended an elegant hand toward Dee. Please, Darian, before the banquet, let me show you Tarns' territory and introduce you to the dwarves and elves who have come to help. As Rogier and Dee departed, Edgar and his daughter Irina approached Tarns. They instinctively stiffened at the sight of the lion hybrid standing beside him. Old prejudices between ordinary humans and the misbegotten die slowly. Misbegotten are not entirely unlike omens, unfortunate atavistic throwbacks of the Crucible, but they are still essentially human, with human emotions and intelligence. Yet in the Golden Order's later days in the lands between, the tails, wings, and scales they sprouted marked them as ill-omened and reduced many to slaves. They are not the same as Fort Hate's demi-humans, who are a different race altogether. Edgar led his daughter forward and knelt on one knee before Tarns. I do not know what words can express my gratitude, Your Majesty. You have restored my daughter's sight. I am moved beyond words. Irina blinked charmingly with eyes reconstructed by the golden grace, then curtsied delicately. Tarns helped Edgar to his feet. Then pledge your loyalty to me, Edgar. Guarding Moen City is your duty, is it not? Edgar nodded solemnly, hesitated at the lion hybrid, and then said with forced resolve, Tarns, Your Majesty, pardon me, but misbegotten cannot be trusted. They are not reliable. He even used a word that made them sound like animals rather than people. The lion hybrid gave no violent reaction. He had long expected such words and found them tiresome. He had been summoned from the lands between by the new Elden Lord and given the Golden Grace. He didn't care now what people like Edgar thought. He intended to follow Tarns. Before Tarns could reply, Roderica, who had been standing silent behind the lion hybrid, spoke up. Sir, I think your attitude toward the misbegotten is too prejudiced. I cannot say all misbegotten are good, but they are certainly not all bad. Like Mr. Hugh, who taught me spirit tuning. The elderly Hugh gave Roderick's sleeve a gentle tug and subtly shook his head, signaling her to wait for Tarns. Edgar's surprise grew when he realized the blonde girl was a member of the Golden Tree's royal family. He'd expected someone of her station to be more hostile to misbegotten, not sympathetic. Tarns answered calmly. I will make arrangements so that the presence of misbegotten does not disrupt ordinary life in the territory. Edgar, I now appoint you deputy to Moen City's lord, Nephili Lu, to assist with all matters in Moen City. Nephili is in the fields outside the castle. You may find her there. With your knowledge of Moen City, I trust you'll work well together. Edgar swallowed whatever he had more to say, accepted the appointment, and left with his daughter. Tarns exhaled and turned to Hugh and Roderica. With them, he did not need subterfuge. He showed a relaxed expression. Hugh looked at him with something like disbelief and asked, "Do you still need this lowly blacksmith to forge weapons, my king?" Tarns surprised him by pulling the old misbegotten into a tight hug, holding him a long while before letting go. "Whether you rest or continue forging for me, choose what you want, Hugh. There are no shackles here and no orders from Marika to bind you. You are free." Hugh stood stunned. He raised his broad, rough hands to his face and trembled. Roderica patted his back reassuringly. When he composed himself, he said, "I will tinker with iron and ore all my life, your majesty. Permit me to wield my hammer and continue forging for you." "Very well," Tarns said with a smile. "I'll give you a larger blacksmith shop, no chains binding you to a wall. When you're tired, stop, get some air, or go to your room and sleep." He looked to Roderica. "There are many empty rooms in the castle. You and Hugh may choose two." "All right, tarnished," Roderica replied brightly. She knew Tarns had something important to discuss with the lion hybrid and left with Hugh. Only Tarns and the lion hybrid remained beneath the golden tree. Tarns's relaxed expression faded to calm seriousness. The lion hybrid bowed his furry head, listening. "Do you have anything to say about Edgar's words?" Tarns asked. The lion hybrid shook his head. "I understand the prejudice ordinary folk have against us. Not long ago we were slaves, slaughtered, and oppressed." Tarns asked, "Aren't you afraid I might feel the same?" The lion hybrid's mouth formed what passed for a smile. "Your kindness to that old misbegotten and your act of bestowing golden grace on my kin show you are different." "Hugh showed me kindness. Golden grace can be given, and it can be taken away," Tarns said. The lion hybrid was quiet a moment, then spoke softly. "We misbegotten have lost everything. Our former dignity was stripped from us. Great Elden Lord, whatever arrangements you make for us, how much worse could it be than the lands between?" Tarns took a straight-bladed misbegotten greatsword from his spatial pack, and with its scabbard, planted it into the golden grass before the lion hybrid. "Take it. Lead your kin in securing the area outside Moen City. After Rogier and Dee return with news from Takrundale, bring your people and come with me. This will be your new home." The lion hybrid reached out, touched the hilt, drew the sword free, slung it across his back, and bowed deeply to Tarns. Half a month later, southeast of Minhiriath, toward Takrundale, Rogier and Dee finally reached a stretch of land long untrodden. "Another town ruined by flood," Rogier said, looking at a settlement overrun with greenery, half submerged in water. "The floods here have been worse than we imagined." Dee's pace lagged slightly behind Rogier's. He wore heavy armor. A deep voice came from under his helmet. "Make sure you mark it on the map, Rogier. How many ruined towns have we passed now?" Rogier pulled a pen and a battered map from his pack. They had been recording everything: jungles, swamps, abandoned towns, and that was why they had spent half a month on the road. He counted the crude house symbols and said, "This is the 8th town ruin. Darien, shall we go inside this one too?" Dee nodded. "Of course. Tarns told us to investigate along the way. Most of these ruins are flooded. There'll be those deadborn we encountered earlier. They must be eradicated." Rogier sighed and pointed at the map. "I must correct you, Darien. According to the notes Tarns gave me, the creatures we met in these ruins are not deadborn, but a malice called Mullip in certain folk tales. Deadborn couldn't form here. Those arise for different reasons." Dee cut him off. "Save the lecture, Rogier. Call them what you like. If they're evil, they will not escape the Golden Order's judgment." Note, Mullip, a water spirit, appears in some folklore. Its association with floods makes it a reasonable threat in Minhiriath, where inundation and many deaths have occurred. Chapter 30. Mulipi Rogier could only blink and close his mouth when Darien cut him off. So it was. A Golden Order knight in gold and silver armor and a sorcerer walking into the damp ruins. Rogier eyed the shallow puddles that stained the stone, their surfaces scummed green and smelling of rot. "I think it's better not to touch that filthy water," he said. Darian stepped around the puddles in iron boots. "I'm not a curious child on his first outing. Places where those who live in death hide are usually filthier than you imagine. No need to warn me." Rogier shrugged, hand resting on the hilt of his rapier, and followed, inspecting the crumbling remnants. Mud had filled the old paths, obscuring carvings and edges. Moss freckled the walls. The architecture stood eroded and silent, lonely and falling into ruin. Occasionally, a lone black bird circled the tumbled roofs, its cry thin and mournful. Every street they walked showed the same story: former bustle gone, replaced by weeds in the stones and stubborn wildflowers blooming unseen. At last they stopped before a relatively intact wooden house, half hidden in overgrowth. Roof tiles were gone, timbers weathered to dark brown. The lintel carvings were blurred by time, and grotesque gargoyles leered from the eaves. The door hung ajar. A breath of cold, damp mildew drifted out. Sunlight barely pierced the gloom inside. They made out a few rotted pieces of furniture, warped and pitted. Darian sighed. Do Mullaip really expect a sane person to live in a place like this? A gloomy, abandoned house with monster decorations at the door. It's practically a sign that something's wrong. "Normal people wouldn't come here," Rogier said with a soft laugh. "Only those lost in the wild would hide in a place like this to rest." Darian paused, then shot back. "Are you saying neither of us is normal?" Rogier drew his rapier and ran a hand along the blade. It shimmered with a brilliant azure light. "I think I'm normal enough, but unfortunately I have to accompany a friend who insists on poking every ruin to see what devils are inside, so maybe I'm not entirely sane either." Darian didn't answer. He gripped his twin blades, gold and silver plated together, until they hummed with a pale, judging light. Then, with a single powerful kick, he broke the door. The old wood cracked and split. The upper half flew up while the lower disintegrated into splinters, sending a cloud of dust through the doorway. A black shape that had crouched in the shadows was flung into the sunlight, its crimson eyes wide with fear and malice. It screeched and hurled a broken plank as a weapon. Darian's sword flashed like lightning and cleaved the flying wood in two. At the same instant, Rogier sprang like a leopard. His rapier and a glintstone blade that materialized and hovered behind him pierced the creature, the Mullaip, whose body seemed made of black sludge. The glintstone magic gnawed at its flesh as if by 1,000 tiny teeth. Its groan turned to a gurgling slush. Rogier's strikes were quick and precise. The Mullaip's struggles dwindled until it slumped into a viscous, unrecognizable puddle. But the attack had only alerted others. From a cellar below, where a single pale candle had guttered over stagnant water, something stirred. Sewage collected in basins. A nauseating stench rose. Ripples rolled across the water, and then one Mullaip after another twisted free of the mud and surged up the stairwell toward the first floor. Darian planted himself at the cellar doorway and met them. From experience, they both knew these creatures liked to hide below. He twisted his wrist. The twin blades struck true, piercing the nearest head. The blades flared with holy gold in the filth. The creature's shriek cut off, and its foul aura snuffed out. A faint sigil of golden order bloomed on Darian's other hand. A prayer, the litany of death, flared with dazzling light even in that putrid cellar. "Defilers must die," Darian intoned, his voice hard as stone. Where the golden light licked, the Mullaip turned to sludge like the first. Then 3 glintstone blades Rory had left hovering swept in from behind, plunging into a nearby puddle. The sludge writhed and with a final unhappy gurgle, stilled. "I found a Mullaip hiding behind the others," Darian said over his shoulder without turning. "You're not needed, Rogier." "Those blades are self-guiding," Rogier answered from above. "They sense an enemy and move on their own." He waved his staff and more glintstone blades reappeared at his shoulders. Then he descended the stone steps and cast the simple illumination spell, Starlight. A clear azure orb floated over his pointed hat, filling the cellar with a cold glow. The light revealed a gruesome scene. The stagnant water was 1/2 meter deep in places. Bones lay mingled in rot, yellowed animal ribs, deer skulls, and human bones, many gnawed or broken. It was impossible to tell when the owners had died. Darian knelt on a damp step, one hand on his twin blade and the other over his chest. "May the departed rest," he muttered, and find the golden shore. Rogier didn't interrupt. He lifted his hat and held it to his heart for a few silent moments before replacing it. He wanted to point out that these dead almost certainly hadn't been Golden Order faithful, and that Darien's prayer was probably wasted, but that would only rile his friend. Instead, he used the light to scan the room and found a pile of treasure in a shallow corner, cups of silver, coins, gems, and pearls, all half submerged in filth. A pale candle, drowned by the water, lay beside it. Of course, Malipe liked to lurk in single-candle cellars and count their hoards by the faint glow. Rogier took his map from his satchel and marked the house with a small black dot. Treasure here. Remember to come back. He did the same at 3 other ruined houses where they'd found plunder. 3 other towns had no such dots because they hadn't found monsters, only neatly gathered skeletons in open squares, likely victims of the old plague the map had mentioned. Rogi sometimes wondered why Tarns had chosen this land to begin rebuilding the Golden Tree. Floods and pestilence seemed to have tortured its people. When he asked Tarns, the answer was always the same. Don't ask. It was ordained. Darien finished his prayers and looked up as Rogier folded the map. Once we've finished searching the rest, we move on, he said. It should be about 2 more days' travel to the Greywater River, Rogier replied. Our destination, Limgrave Great Bridge, is on the far bank. Before they left the wooden house, Rogier sealed the cellar and left a magical mark so they could return with others to recover the treasure. Darien watched him and couldn't help but tease. You sealed those cellars and marked them too? Since when did you get so greedy, Rogier? Rogier waved him along. I'm not greedy, Darien. The things we find are for Tarns. Darien's brow knit. Tarns? He's not one to be moved by jewels, last I recall. Sometimes he collects odd little things. Mushrooms, shards of glass, loa fruit, Darien mused. If you're trying to curry favor, bring plants and flowers. He might like those more. Rogier opened his mouth to argue, but Darien's memory matched his. He gave a helpless smile. No, you misunderstand. Tarnies can be eccentric, yes, but he's not after trinkets. I mark treasures because they may matter to the people of this world. What seems insignificant to us can be priceless to others. 2 days later, near dusk, they reached the Greywater River. It wound like a dark, angry thread to the sea. Wave after wave shimmered with the sun's last gold. Reeds rustled along the banks. On the opposite shore, a vast port rose, its silhouette ancient and desolate in the dying light. Let's rest here for the night, Rogier said, glancing back. We can look for a shallower crossing in daylight. Darien removed his helmet and stared across the river as the sun sank. The sky bled color, orange to indigo, and the moon paled over water that looked like scattered glass. There was no obvious ford. You're right, Darien agreed. We can't cross before dark. We should camp. They climbed a low mound 10 meters from the bank. Rogier gathered dry grass, twigs, and a few stones, set the stones into a small ring, smeared some fire oil from his satchel on the kindling, and lit the campfire. Darien prepared dinner, dry bacon brought from their rations. Then Rogier stomped out the flame. Darien, hand already on his twin blade, didn't bother to ask. Rogier scooped dirt over the smoking embers and made a shushing gesture, pointing across the river. Across the water, on the supposed ruins of Limgrave Great Bridge, points of torchlight had appeared. The torchlight gave shape to the figures who carried them, filthy bodies, grotesque faces. Rogier leaned close and whispered, one word like a bitter wind between them. Orcs. Chapter 31. A home must be built by one's own hands. Orcs. Rogier said it in a low voice. Darien frowned. Orcs? Are those the beasts you said attacked the Golden Tree before? Rogier nodded, then reached out and grabbed Darien just as he was about to stand. Wait. Don't be impulsive. Darien bristled. Those creatures attacked the Golden Tree. They're right there. How can I just stand and watch? I'm not telling you to stand here doing nothing, Rogier said wearily. I said, don't be impulsive. These orcs aren't particularly powerful individually, but there are many of them, and some are cruel and cunning. I don't like the idea of you going alone. How would you cross the Greywater River? What if they've posted sentries at every crossing? Darien fell silent and glanced across the river with a rising anger in his chest. Then what do you suggest? Do we just let them do whatever they want there? For once, Rogier's gaze hardened. Stop arguing and let me see what they're doing. Chastened, Darien watched Rogier take off his pointed wizard's hat. Rogier squinted into the firelight on the far bank, counting orcs and studying their movements. These orcs did not look like newcomers to Tok'randale, the abandoned great port. Newly fitted iron baskets for torches had been fastened along the long-neglected walls, and orcs were placing burning torches into them, lighting the place piece by piece. Under those flickering lights, Rogier noticed orcs working with polished stone and felled trunks, clearing rubble and repairing streets and buildings. Had the orcs somehow changed? Rogier suppressed the thought and kept watching. Then he saw something that made his blood run cold. Some of the orcs who had been carrying stone and wood were pulled away by the bark of an orc captain. They returned not with building materials, but with ragged, filthy humans. Men, women, children whose hollow faces spoke of long hunger. Their hands and feet were bound in crude shackles. At the captain's lash, an old man fell. The captain laughed heartily, and the surrounding orcs seized the fallen man. Rogier saw an iron blade sink into the man's chest as he was carried off. The remaining humans moved with mechanical obedience toward the piles of stone and wood, lifting and hauling as the orcs drove them. A few were sent to the shipyards by the river to repair the neglected slips. "Those orcs have enslaved the people to rebuild Tok'randale," Rogier said. "I can see that," Darien said coldly. "The question is, why are they repairing the port?" "I don't know," Rogier admitted, "but it's not for anything good." Darien stared across the river. "Then we'll cross the gray water at night, break in, and free them." Rogier looked helpless. "Darien, do you not have the word caution in your head? We don't know how many orcs there are. We haven't scouted the terrain. If we kill these orcs, what will we do with the people we free? We don't have food to feed them." Darien opened his mouth, then Rogier added quietly, "And if we feed them with what the orcs leave, what then? Leave them here to starve again?" Darien had no answer. After a long pause, he said, "We can take them back to the golden tree." Rogier let out a strained sound and watched him. Under the scrutiny, Darien rubbed his forehead. "All right, don't stare. I know it's unrealistic to bring dozens of people all the way back through the wilderness to the golden tree, but I can't stand by and let them be enslaved." "Then we must return at once and tell King Tarnas," Rogier said, each word deliberate. "Don't be a reckless hero, Darien. Only by informing King Tarns can we get an organized rescue. You didn't rush into the Deathblight like a fool, did you?" Rogier squinted at the other shore. "And you know orcs. If they find out you're trying to rescue those people, they'll use them against you." Darien glanced at the thin, hollow figures in the torchlight along Limgrave Great Bridge. He sighed. "You're right. We'll go back and report to King Tarnas." 10 days later, the golden tree had grown into a great tree over 50 meters tall. Its trunk pierced the sky, its broad bole like the backbone of an ancient beast. The light it shed was a beacon, visible for miles. With the help of elves and dwarves, the settlers had cultivated several fertile plots and built a fishing dock by the river that ran through the ruined city. Crops grown under the influence of golden grace were remarkably nutritious. Feed made from them produced river fish with plumper, juicier flesh. The fish did not turn gold, but the dwarves who ate food rich in golden grace found their pupils slowly taking on a golden hue, and a few elves sometimes had a glimmer of gold deep in their eyes. It was only a physical change. No one claimed the dwarves or elves had become citizens of the golden tree, but the dwarves said they felt stronger and more spirited in their work, and the elves felt new inspiration for song and verse. King Tarns was at Hate Fort, hearing recent reports from Kenneth Hate and his clerks, Roderica and Irina. He preferred to hear them there, partly because they did not need to travel into Moen City's castle, and partly because the king could not stay idle. He had just returned to Hate Fort after leading a patrol of Godric's soldiers when Kenneth's clerk began. Regarding this week's patrols, Roderica said in her capable voice, smiling at the king with her restored golden eyes, the Lion Hybrid reports that under his command, the scale-skinned hybrids annihilated a 10-man orc raiding party that had crossed into their territory. Afterward, he sent the winged hybrids to scout about 2 kilometers beyond the golden tree's perimeter to ensure no orcs remained. "And casualties among the misbegotten?" Tarns asked. "Only one scale-skinned hybrid was slightly wounded by a warg. He's healed and has rejoined his unit, Roderica replied. Irina, a step behind her, added shyly, everything is normal in Moen City, except Deputy Commander Edgar reported that the golden tree is growing so quickly it may outgrow Moen City's grounds in a few months. He asks for a solution. Tarns pinched the bridge of his nose. The golden tree had outpaced his expectations. He had assumed the castle grounds would contain it for some time, but its rapid growth had become a real problem. Kenneth Haight added, the new farmlands have been cultivated. You can now summon more residents to the lands between. Our current reserves could support an additional 50 people, calculated with emergency stores in mind. Good, Tarns said, but the number worried him. Summoning required grace, and some summons ate a terrifying amount, greater than Tarns had expected even for seemingly weak servants. He remembered Mr. Goldmask's enormous grace cost, not due to combat prowess, but because his calculations could single-handedly create perfect rune structures. Kenneth cleared his throat. One more request. The demi-humans have petitioned for kin and their queen to be summoned, and for a forest outside Haight Fort to be given to them. Why now? Tarns asked. Kenneth looked uncomfortable. There are too many humans inside the fort. The demi-humans can't stand living in close quarters with us. They prefer wild forests and caves. To be honest, I don't understand it. It's as if they're choosing savagery over civilization. Whether we understand or not, we should respect their wishes, Tarns said. To them, those wilds may be sacred. Kenneth relaxed. Then that's all. At that moment, Rogier rushed in, breathless and disheveled. Wait, there's something else. Rogier? When did you return? Where's Darian? Tarns asked, startled. Rogier, uncharacteristically rough around the edges, planted one hand on the table and drained a wooden cup of water. Kenneth refilled it for him while Tarns demanded, What is it? Takrundale, Rogier said, and a force of orcs has occupied the abandoned Great Bridge. They've enslaved dozens of humans and are forcing them to rebuild the port. Tarns's face hardened. How many orcs? Why didn't Darian return with you? Darian's resting outside, Rogier said. Traveling in his armor wears him out more than it does me. As for numbers, there are more orcs than in the previous raid, and I don't know if some are hidden inside the Great Bridge buildings. I told Darian to return and report to you. Tarns unfurled the map Bilbo had given him and studied it. If the orcs make Takrundale a supply base for their forces in Minheriath, that's a grave threat. We cannot allow them to hold that port. Kenneth's face was taut. We don't have an army to spare. Haight Fort and Moen City are already thinly garrisoned, and our food reserves won't support a campaign. At that moment, a figure strode into the doorway, the lion hybrid, heavy-footed, his misbegotten greatsword strapped to his back. My kin and I can go to Takrundale, he said. We don't need much food to fight, and my winged kin can scout and move quickly. He turned to Tarns. You gifted us misbegotten the Golden Tree as a home. If Takrundale threatens that home, then we must reclaim our home with our own blood and fire. Tarns met his gaze and nodded. Very well. The misbegotten would take up arms to drive the orcs from Takrundale. Chapter 32. In Takrundale Third Age, June 2939, the ruins of Limgrave Great Bridge Spring had hardened into a scorching summer, and Minheriath's lands were filling with green. For the humans enslaved by the orcs, the only mercy was that June nights were no longer as freezing as in spring. Fewer woke to an eternal sleep in the dawn. Get up, you lazy dogs. If you don't want to be picked for the wargs, move your hands and feet. An orc stomped into a dilapidated wooden shack and shouted. He cracked his whip across the sleeping prisoners, sending fresh welts onto already scarred skin. The whipped stirred with a gasp, stumbled from their pallet, and shuffled out into another day of labor in chains. 2 less. 42 left, a young man muttered from a shadowed corner. His face was plastered with a mask of numbness, but his eyes burned. Alberto had more scars than the others, and was broader in build. While the whip marks were fresh, many gouges and healed wounds showed he'd been a trained soldier before the orcs ambushed his patrol. They had fought hard, killing some orcs, but were outnumbered. Most of his comrades died. He was cut down and woke in this place, a long-abandoned port whose name he hadn't bothered to memorize from old maps. The hot early summer sun beat on his bent back. The stones he hauled were warm under his palms. Hunger gnawed in his belly, but his heart felt colder than the morning air. Men slipped into death here every day, under an orc's blade, crushed by labor or fed to wargs. Escape seemed impossible. A sudden kick drove the orc's boot into Alberto's spine. He pitched forward onto the stone pile, blood running from a split brow. "Hurry up! If this dock isn't repaired by nightfall, I'll throw you all to the wargs." The orc snarled, and the whip cracked twice more across Alberto's shoulders. The orc spat on him and laughed as he stalked away. Alberto held himself up against the stones, breath jagged, the blow only making his hunger and pain worse. He cursed under his breath, careful not to draw the orc's ears, and pushed to his feet, wrenching another block free. Then shadows passed over the worksite, and alarm ran through the orcs. Arrows screamed down from the sky, a high, whistling roar that tore at the ears. Alberto flattened himself beside the stones. Gravel and dust burst around him with each arrow impact. As a soldier, he'd known the terror of stray shafts. He shouted to the others to take cover, and they dove for whatever shelter they could reach. Above the ruins, creatures with wings circled like falcons, their feathers shaded from pure white at the roots to deep black at the tips, and they gleamed with a metallic sheen in the sun. Their gaze swept the ground with predatory precision. The orc who had tormented them stood in the ruined street, his cruel smile frozen as the winged attackers struck. He tried to sound an alarm, a bellowed word, but the sky answered with a dozen arrows. The shafts slammed into him, tearing blood and flesh. Some plunged through his open mouth and out the back of his neck. The whip clattered to the ground as the orc's body convulsed and went limp. When the rain of arrows lessened and the whooshing overhead died away, Alberto let out a shaky breath and stared at the corpse. He watched half the winged creatures flap away, the others circling and keeping watch. They could not carry much. They'd already spent many of their arrows, and those that left were gone to resupply. He was sure they had seen him and the other prisoners, but for some reason they hadn't attacked the humans. His companions crawled out from their hiding places, dust on their clothes, eyes wide. "Anyone hurt?" he called. "No," came the replies, hoarse, uncertain, but everyone answered. "It looks like they're targeting the orcs," Alberto whispered. He forced a grin. "Hide well. Don't be seen. This might be our only chance to run. You all want to go home, right? Remember the hearth and warm bread? Don't let them find you. Understand?" A chorus of determined faces answered him. Alberto took advantage of the distraction. He lurched up, slipped to the dead orc, and wrenched a scimitar from its belt. The other orcs' attention was on the sky. Most remained inside their ruined houses, hiding, or else they assumed such an aerial assault could only come from another band of orcs. Under that mistake, Alberto managed to slip back to the stone pile. He used the blunt scimitar to cut the thick rope between his wrist irons, then hacked at the thin chain joining his leg shackles. The metal rang with every blow. The chain finally gave, leaving the sword edge nicked but their owner freed. Other prisoners followed suit. A burly man pried a short knife from beneath a corpse and sliced through his bindings. An iron axe was taken from another orc and used to smash cuffs. Children and the elderly were helped free, and for the first time in months, faces that had been vacant with despair showed hope. "Alberto, only you were a soldier," a man said. Several others nodded. "We'll follow you. What now?" Alberto opened his mouth to answer, but a harsh voice cut through the air. "Cowards! If you can't shoot them down, at least don't let these scum fly freely. Sound the horn. Drag those cowards out of their rooms to shoot." A muffled horn rolled across Takrundel, and orcs poured from shadowed doorways like a tide. Houses trembled. The ruined town had become a march and a snarl. Bows were raised and arrows loosed at the winged attackers. Alberto hissed, "Everyone, hide! Stop what you're doing!" They flattened behind rubble as orcs streamed from the central house where the leader stood at a window, peering up at the flyers. In doing so, the orc captain had betrayed his position. A winged scout marked the house as a target and descended. By the Greywater River, several orc corpses lay soaked with black blood. A lion hybrid stood nearby, flanked by nearly 100 scale-armored hybrids. They shook rain from their bodies as they resupplied the winged fighters. Tarns, mounted on Toriti, rode up to them. The returning flyer landed and rasped, "We found the command room. Orc captain is here." Tarns exchanged a look with the lion hybrid and gave a curt nod. The lion hybrid bared his teeth in a fierce grin, then dropped to all fours. With the great hybrid sword on his back, he launched himself forward like a running beast. His mane flashed crimson in the sunlight. The scale plates of the other hybrids glittered like dragonhide. Their strides were thunder on the ruined earth as they charged toward Takrandel. Chapter 33. The Defiant Ones. The orcs felt the faint tremor underfoot and heard a sound growing louder in the distance. Panic spread through the camp. The orc captain, positioned at the center, dared not climb the hastily built watchtower. Its platform wobbed and offered no shelter. He feared being picked off by whatever flew overhead. He blew the alarm horn to rouse the orcs outside when he sensed the tremor, but he did not know that the force charging toward them was the scale-skinned hybrids led by the lion hybrid. Had he known, he would have ordered his men to hold to the houses and make use of cover instead of letting the orcs of Takrundale rush out into the open. Albert crouched in the shadow of a ruined building, thinking fast. First, the winged ones in the sky, what I call the birdmen, rained arrows on the first wave. Then the captain blows the horn, and one of the winged hybrids lands. If the birdmen are serving as archers, they've just given away the location of the commander. After the archers finish, the main force will charge that spot. His pupils narrowed as the realization settled in. The tremor had come from the running of winged kin on the ground. He needed to get his people away from the orcs, and as far as possible, fast. Otherwise, they would be in the path of that main force, and trusting the enemy's mercy on a battlefield was a foolish gamble. "Hey, everyone, listen," he told the men huddled around him in a low voice. "The allies of those birdmen are charging here. They're drawing the orcs' attention. We use this chance to run. When I say kill those orcs standing by the stone and lumber piles, then run out of the port. Don't look back, understand?" The children and adults, faces streaked with dust and grime, nodded. They clutched scavenged weapons looted from orc corpses felled by the first arrow storm, held their breath, gathered their last strength, and waited. Albert watched an orc whose back was turned. The horn had sent it to pick up its weapon and join its companions. As the orc moved, Albert sprang from the shadows like a hunting cat. "Kill them!" he shouted. His machete slammed into the orc's neck. The blade did less cutting than the brute force of the blow. The orc's neck broke under the impact. Rage lit the faces in the hiding places. Years of oppression poured out in a single, furious burst. Axes, blades, arrows, and even stones battered the few orcs caught by surprise. Those orcs had not expected the human slaves to survive the first arrow rain, let alone to have broken their shackles and risen up. They howled and roared, but anger and surprise quickly smothered their resistance until the last one fell. Albert wiped orc blood from his face and barked orders. "Strip them for weapons. Take what we need. We don't have time. Get moving before more orcs arrive." The thrill of revenge broke as the fugitives obeyed. A handful grabbed weapons and, under Albert's lead, fled away from the area under the winged hybrids. Their cries and the dying screams reached orcs farther off. One-eyed Aok, a squad leader, howled, "Stop those human slaves! Shoot them! Where are the wargs? Let the wargs hunt them down." Some orcs turned and let fly a volley of arrows. The winged hybrids in the sky were beyond range now and could not protect everyone, but the fleeing humans were easy targets. Arrows hissed through the air toward Albert and the others. Albert had already warned them to run close to walls and use any cover. The human tide broke into an ant-like scatter, clinging to walls, ducking behind piles of rubble. No one in the group was cut down outright, but the elderly and some children were grazed, blood mixing with sweat as they staggered on. The wounds burned. The blood darkened quickly. Those orc arrows were poisoned. Then the wargs arrived. "Gondor wargs!" someone cried. Albert didn't stop. He turned and saw the wargs thundering toward them, low growls rising from their throats, gray-yellow muscles rippling. No trained squad could outrun a warg. These starving slaves stood no chance. Albert watched the wounded slow. An old man at the back could hardly move. The lead warg launched and sank fangs into the old man's thigh. Time seemed to freeze as the wolf snarled over its prey. "Don't stop! Run!" Albert screamed, and then, without another thought, planted his foot and doubled back. He barreled into the warg. The machete flashed, and the first warg fell with a piteous howl. Albert felt hot pain as claws raked his arm. 3 deep slashes exposed bone and sent blood springing out. Despite his wounds, he shoved on. The old man, gasping, grabbed a fist-sized stone and threw with all the remaining strength he had, but the stone was useless. A second warg leaped at him. Albert drove his bladed edge into that second warg's throat, but was driven to the ground by its dying weight. He hit the rough earth hard, skin lacerated and bleeding, pinned beneath the carcass. More wargs descended, their slavering mouths opening on the rooftops. Albert watched as 2 wargs pounced on the old man he'd tried to save, a scream cut short, replaced by the sick, wet sound of fangs and tearing flesh. Anger and pain seared through Albert. He tried to roll the heavy corpse off, but exhaustion robbed him of strength. The warg's weight fell back on him. Above, on a rooftop, a warg bared its teeth and watched. From the edge of the skirmish, one-eyed Aoki rode in on a warg, leering down with a drawn saber. "He's one of Gondor's soldiers," Aoki sneered, licking the blood from his blade. "He killed many of our comrades once. Now he tries to run with human slaves. I'll flay him and feed his flesh to them." Albert met his gaze in silence. With his uninjured hand hidden beneath the corpse, he clutched the broken machete. He had one last plan, to take an orc with him. If he could only free his hand and strike true. "Break his limbs," Auk ordered. The wild wargs lunged forward with delighted growls. Albert, voice a raw, hoarse whisper, swore quietly to Gondor. He shoved the corpse aside, rose with the last of his strength, and charged the orc captain who advanced on him. His legs wavered, his breath tore from him, but he kept going. "For Gondor," he murmured in his heart. Then a war cry from behind the orc lines cut across the field, different from Albert's shout. "For Taines! For the golden tree!" The ground shuddered. A lion hybrid's roar echoed through Tuckrundale. 3 short horn blasts rose from the center, the orc captain's call for aid. From the sky came a familiar sound. Half of the winged hybrids that had left returned, quivers refilled, and a furious rain of arrows descended upon the orcs. The one-eyed Aok cursed, slapped his saber hilt into Albert's forehead, and kicked him in the gut. Albert went down hard. "Leave him. Support the boss." Aoke barked to the wargs. The wargs snarled but obeyed, slinking away as the archers swarmed and the battle around them turned deadly. Albert saw the birdmen descending, felt the thunder of wings, heard Aoke's curses and the wargs' dying cries. The world narrowed to pain and noise, then tipped into blackness. When consciousness left him, Albert's last thoughts were of running, of the children and the torn, brave faces of those who had risen up with him. Then everything faded. Chapter 34. Our master has returned over Tuckrundale. After emptying their second quivers, the winged hybrids drew the short daggers at their waists, beat their wings to descend, and dove to the streets to finish the orcs below. At the same time, the scale-skinned hybrids, led by the lion hybrid, smashed through the orc barricade like a hot blade through cloth, trampling arrow-pierced corpses and surging into the alleys. A burly orc on a warg stood in the street, utterly unaware of how precarious his position was. He had a squad working to set up a barricade, intending to stop the misbegotten here. He bared his teeth at the approaching lion hybrid and shouted to the others. The orcs behind him knocked their bows, released, and arrows flew. "Roar, for Taines your majesty, for the golden tree." The lion hybrid answered with an even fiercer roar. The scale-skinned hybrids behind him roared in unison. He swung his greatsword in a wide arc and met the volley head-on. The clash of metal and arrow rang out like a harsh bell. Not every arrow was intercepted. Several bit into his armor and flesh. Pain flashed like sparks, and the sight of blood only stoked his savagery. Flames burned in his eyes as his roar turned into a lion's bellow. The scale-skinned hybrids did not all copy that frontal parry. Many dispersed to either side. Their heavy weapons and long reach turned the narrow streets into traps. Arrows fell, but the hybrids moved with wind-like grace, slipping through alleys and vaulting onto the splintered roofs. Timber groaned beneath them as they ran. Above, the beating of wings sounded like a drum roll. Just as the hulking orc leader prepared to shout orders, wind rushed past him. He looked up to see winged hybrids plunging down like hawks, short blades flashing cold in the sun. Before the orc soldiers could react, the winged hybrids were among them like ghosts. The orcs tried to redress their aim, but the birdmen were impossibly quick. The orc's movements felt clumsy and inadequate. Screams, the ring of metal, and the dull thud of blades burying in flesh braided into a violent, chaotic chorus. A winged hybrid stomped on an orc's face. The crude features twisted in an instant. A blade flashed across a throat. Blood, a wild animal freed from a pen, spurted and painted the cobbles. The world spun for the wounded orc, and then darkness swallowed him. "Damned birdmen, where are you orcs from? Why attack us?" the warg rider roared. He had managed to wheel the beast out of the immediate strike and struck back with his scimitar, trying to fend off the aerial attackers. Up close, these birdmen did not look human. The rider, unsure of their origin, assumed them to be some mutated orcs from elsewhere. Boom. The makeshift barricade collapsed under the lion hybrid's weight. The warg growled and lunged at the invaders, but the rider only caught a glimpse of a sword shadow before agony and then darkness took him. The headless body slid from the saddle and thudded to the cluttered street. The lion hybrid grabbed the warg by the throat with a huge red-furred paw and hoisted it off the ground. Its strength was absolute. The warg's struggles were futile. "We are not orcs. We are Tanes, your majesty's bravest misbegotten legion," the lion hybrid declared. His greatsword pierced the warg's belly. He heaved, and the warg's corpse was thrown aside like a rag, landing across the headless rider. Not far off, the cries of scale-skinned hybrids and orcs tore at the air. Steel met wood and leather. Orcs screamed as the hybrid's massive weapons split shields and bone. One scale-skinned hybrid brought down an axe that shattered 3 shields at once. The orc's arms broke under the blow. The orc weapons could not reach the hybrids before the hybrids' 2-handed axes, and the long scimitars of some cleaved orc and blade alike. An orc sent flying by an axe handle staggered to his feet, dazed and furious. He flailed with a broken sword at the nearest hybrid. The hybrid swept his long, thick tail like a net. The orc lost his balance, and the axe blade sank into his chest. His roar choked and faded. By virtue of size and strength, the scale-skinned hybrids were shredding the orc lines at an appalling rate, roughly 15 orcs killed for every hybrid lost. The few hybrids who fell were taken by surprise, struck by arrows from orcs firing from windows and roofs. The urban setting favored the defenders who could hide in ambush. In an open plain, the outcome might have been different. The lion hybrid, however, showed no relish for needless sacrifice. His brute force was directed, not suicidal. "Winged hybrids, take out the archers," the lion hybrid ordered when he saw orcs firing from inside houses. The winged hybrids surged upward and soared in elegant arcs, their wings stirring the air. They spotted the bowmen crouched in shadowy window frames. Arrows knocked. The birdmen adjusted their posture like dancers in midair, dodging volley after volley. They reached the roofs and windows just as the orc archers were frantically resupplying from exhausted quivers. The winged hybrids crashed down into the houses. Panicked orc cries and the shrill shrieks of hybrids mixed into a raw symphony. Without their archers' support, the orc battle lines began to unravel. Positions that had looked solid loosened like sand under surf. Fear spread from one orc face to the next until the formation collapsed. One orc cut down a fleeing comrade to clear a route and then bolted. Others followed. Even a captain's attempt to hold ground failed in the tide of retreat. In the city center, a command horn lay shattered where a winged hybrid had smashed it. The hornblower was impaled on a wooden stake, his black blood congealing in the dust. An orc captain's eyes reflected terror as scale-skinned hybrids surged like a flood and winged hybrids wheeled overhead, scales and feathers catching the sun. His warg had died outside. He was trapped inside a house. When the lion hybrid stepped in, the captain's defenses crumpled. Before he could react, a heavy force pinned him to the ground. The lion hybrid had the point of his greatsword pressed against the captain's shoulder plate. "Where in the world are you orcs from? Are you mad? Aren't you afraid of the master's wrath?" The captain spat when he saw how filthy the misbegotten were. The mistaken insult that called them orcs stung the lion hybrid. The lion hybrid scowled, then kicked the captain hard in the gut. "You're wrong, you blind fool." His voice was rough with contempt. Tarns appeared then, still clad in his white wolf war ghost armor. The surrounding hybrids bowed their heads in respect. "You have done well," he said with a nod. "First, send some to search the enslaved humans. The rest of you, Check for any orcs still hiding in Takrandale. Be careful. These orcs are cunning. Do not let your guard down just because they fled. The misbegotten dispersed. Only the lion hybrid remained, holding the captain down. Tarns, your majesty, he is the orc commander of Takrandale, the lion hybrid reported in a low voice. Tarns glanced at the lion hybrid's wounds. Several arrows had broken and stuck in his arm and back. 2 shallow cuts marked his chest. He handed the lion hybrid a red dew holy grail bottle and a moss fruit. Treat your wounds, he said. I've heard orcs sometimes poison their arrows. Don't fall for something so stupid. Tarns took the greatsword from the lion hybrid, tapped the orc captain's face with the blade, and asked, "Why are you orcs here?" The captain laughed hoarsely, and instead of answering, snarled at the lion hybrid. Humans? You serve a human? You and your kind have betrayed our master. He will punish you. The lion hybrid, already pleased that Tarns had tended him, darkened at the insult. He shouldered forward and kicked the captain again. Tarns lightly drew the greatsword across the man's throat and leaned close. Answer me, orc. Why are you here? Who ordered the repairs to Takrandal? The captain gave a strange smile, then, deliberately, slit his own throat with the blade. Blood spurted. The lion hybrid checked and shook his head. He's dead, Tarnes, your majesty. I know. Tarnes exhaled and returned the sword to the lion hybrid, taking back his red dew bottle. The captain's last words rang in his head, echoing the warning Gandalf had once given. Darkness lurks beneath the light, and in the caves, forests, and mountains we cannot see, evil forces are festering. Tarns felt suddenly the need to find Gandalf and tell him what they had uncovered. Elrond had said Gandalf went east into the Misty Mountains after leaving Rivendell. That was far from Minhirioth, and his current whereabouts were uncertain. Tarns made a mental note. When they met again, he must find a way to contact Gandalf quickly. A commotion outside broke the thread of his thoughts. He shared a look with the lion hybrid, who stepped out, then returned. Tarns, your majesty, he said, the enslaved humans, some of them want to see you. Chapter 35, Time to Go Home. Tarns stepped out and found more than 20 humans of varying ages clustered together, their faces hollow with fear. Those with weapons shielded the unarmed, and in the center lay a horribly wounded, unconscious young man. They were terrified of the misbegotten who surrounded them, perhaps because of the orc blood dripping from the misbegotten's weapons, or because the creatures themselves looked filthy, almost orc-like. So when Tarns appeared before them clad in white wolf war ghost armor, a stir went through the crowd. None of them had expected the leader of these terrifying humanoids to look like an ordinary human. "Noble sir, please help us." A man with messy golden hair stepped forward and pleaded humbly. Tarns looked over the ragged, emaciated, and wounded group and turned to the lion hybrid, who had taken a step behind him. "Hand out some food," he said. "Search Takrandale for clothes. Anything will do, even orc clothing. It's warm enough by day, but they won't last the nights like this." The lion hybrid hesitated, "But the food we eat is... I don't know if these humans will be used to it." Tarns understood the implication. The dry rations the misbegotten carried for travel were barely palatable, not the sort of thing ordinary humans would enjoy. He replied, "Look at how emaciated they are. They haven't had proper food in a long time. Giving them rich food all at once could hurt them. The rations we have are exactly what they need." The lion hybrid nodded and led a few scale-skinned hybrids away to distribute rations and scavenge clothing. Only then did Tarns remove his white wolf warghost helmet, revealing his face. The sight eased the humans' anxiety. They realized their leader wasn't some monstrous being hidden in armor. Tarns walked over and immediately frowned at the gravelly wounded youth. His chest was barely rising. He knelt beside him, and the misbegotten automatically made way. The humans holding weapons stepped aside too after a heartbeat, comparing their tattered arms to Tarns's armor and the misbegotten at his back. At least this human wasn't as brutal as an orc, and he'd saved them from a warg pursuit. A little caution wouldn't do any harm. Tarns opened a red dew vial he had not yet stowed away and turned to one of the frightened children. "You, help prop up his upper body and pry his mouth open. If he isn't treated soon, he'll die." The boy shied away, eyes darting, but the golden-haired man who had spoken earlier stepped forward to help. The blessed liquid flowed into the young man's mouth. The injuries sealed almost instantly. In seconds, the wounds were gone without a scar. The onlookers breathed as one. Cough, cough. The wounded man began to cough and then snapped awake, instinctively swinging at one of the people beside him. Tarns reacted quickly and easily caught the blow, but the man supporting the injured youth, Mills, took a solid punch to the face. He only covered his cheek and smiled. Albert, you're awake. Mills, what happened to me? Albert looked dazed. Tarnas released his hand and said calmly, You passed out on the battlefield. I saved you. That's all. Albert glanced at the unfamiliar faces in his surroundings, and the raw relief of being alive showed. Thank you, unknown knight. Tarns waved him off. No thanks necessary. You have a strong life force. He helped Albert to his feet and addressed the tense group. I am a wizard, and I am also the Lord of the Golden Tree territory. The misbegotten around you are my soldiers, not orcs. You're safe. Your lives are not in danger. At the word wizard, the crowd's fear broke. Led by Albert, people hugged and wept in relief. Their suspicion of the misbegotten evaporated. If a wizard kept such creatures, they assumed the hybrids were harmless. Tarns added, I know you have questions, and I have some for you. Come inside and we'll talk. The misbegotten will look after your people. When the lion hybrid returned with dry rations and some cast-off orc garments, Albert addressed the crowd briefly and then followed Tarns into the house where the orc captain had been quartered. Lord Tarns, where are we now? Albert asked, eager and unsettled. I was captured by orcs and woke up in a cage. Tarns glanced at him. This is Limgrave Greatbridge, west of the Inade region. Now tell me, do you know when the orcs started repairing this port? Tuckrundale. I'm actually that far west? Albert murmured, then answered Tarns's question. I'm not certain, sir. When I arrived, there were already humans forced to work at this port. I was taken a little over a month ago, but some of the survivors say they were brought here 4 months ago. The one I hit, the one who helped me, Mills, he said he's been here the longest. 4 months ago, Tarnans did a quick mental calculation. It was June now, so 4 months back would be February. He remembered Bilbo had told him the date was March when he'd fallen into Bilbo's house. That meant the orcs were present in the region before Tarns had set out for Minhiriath. Good. Tarnas felt a small relief. The orcs' arrival hadn't been triggered by his golden tree. Tarnas fell silent, thinking, and Albert waited without interrupting. Could you call Mills in as well? I have questions for him, Tarns asked after a moment. Albert nodded and returned with Mills. The golden-haired man bowed slightly. Wizard, sir. Just call me Tarns, he said, waving Mills not to be nervous. Mills, Albert says you were brought here about 4 months ago? Mills thought a moment. I think so. I come from a tiny village in Rohan with only 7 or 8 families. It was a cold winter when orcs raided us at night and took everyone. Afterward, the weather warmed and green weeds grew spring, and that's when Albert was sent here. I only guessed how long I'd been here by the seasons. Tarnas asked, Did anyone who left with you survive? A flash of sadness crossed Mills's face before he shook his head. No, I'm the only one left from my village. Tarnas offered a quiet, You have my condolences. Albert patted Mills's shoulder to comfort him. Mills straightened. As long as I live, they are in my heart, and you, Lord Tarns, killed those damned orcs. That's some revenge for my family. Tarns turned to Albert. Where are you from? Gondor, Lord Tarns, Albert replied proudly. Then, after a beat, he asked humbly, I know it's presumptuous, but could you send me back to Gondor? Orcs in the west feel like a threat. I must bring this intelligence home. Tarnas shook his head. I can't, Albert. I have too much to handle in my own territory, and no time for a long escort to Gondor. I can send a band of misbegotten to take you near Gondor. They'll escort you as far as they can, and then turn back when they see other humans. Their appearance is too orc-like to bring them directly into human settlements without causing trouble. Albert accepted this with relief. Tarns then asked Mills if he wished to return to Rohan. Mills bowed his head. My home is ashes. Everyone I loved is gone. I have nothing to go back to. If you'll have me, Lord Tarns, I would follow you and rebuild a new life. There are others who are rootless. Let me bring them with me. Tarns smiled. You're welcome. My lands are busy, and there's work to do, but you may rebuild with us. Then I will gather who will come, Mills said eagerly. Tarns gave him a task. Find out how many will follow. The rest. Albert, you're in charge of taking those who choose to return to Gondor. Of course, Lord Tarns, Albert answered firmly. Of the 23 surviving humans, 19 chose to follow Mills to Tarns's territory. 4 young men opted to go with Albert to Gondor. The majority who stayed were the elderly, women, and children. A day later, after the survivors had rested, Tarns prepared to leave. The Golden Tree territory required his attention, and his soul collector had finished absorbing the souls from the fight at Tockrendale, enough to summon Stormvale Castle. Tarns estimated nearly 1,000 orcs had perished in the Misbegottens' assault, while over 30 of his own had fallen. The winged hybrids had suffered the most, many dying as they charged into houses to shield their comrades from orc archers. Still, to win with just over 200 soldiers proved the Misbegottens' formidable strength. He had the fallen Misbegotten frozen with snow magic and loaded onto the carts the orcs had left behind. These comrades had died bravely. Tarns would not abandon them here. Tockrendale will be entrusted to you, he told the lion hybrid, watching the carts. When I return, I'll summon some of your kin and send proper food as support. We are grateful, Lord Tarns, the lion hybrid said softly, looking at the hybrids carrying their dead. We are thankful to die in glory and to return to the Golden Tree after death. Don't dwell on the past, Tarns said with a smile and took his leave. Albert prepared to leave with his 4 escorts. He and Mills walked together for a moment, their faces much brighter than the day before, no longer numb but filled with cautious hope. Thank you again, Lord Tarns, Albert said earnestly. When I return to Gondor, I will tell of what you did. He waved and departed under the escort of 4 winged hybrids, heading the opposite way with his companions. Let's go, Tarns said. It's time to go home. Chapter 36, On Sale Remarks. I have to admit, I'm an idiot. I thought November had 31 days and that the book would go on sale tomorrow. Facepalm. I only just finished typing and realized today is already the 1st. I mixed up Monday with the 1st of the month. Anyway, enough excuses. I'll definitely post another update later today. I've noticed many readers avoiding this story because the protagonist isn't a player, and I can understand that. People expect a protagonist to be unkillable, carefree, and to fight enemies on sight. The reason I didn't make the protagonist a player, though, is simple. People die when they're killed. It sounds obvious, but in Chinese the idea comes out like this. Life is precious and happens only once. If the protagonist were an immortal, digitized being, many of Middle-earth's scenes would lose their meaning. I'm not just a fan of Miyazaki-sensei, I'm also a fan of Tolkien. Tolkien emphasized one thing strongly. When faced with death, life still meets it with courage and shines brilliantly. Ages long past, the elves will forever remember the bravery of men, marveling at how short their lifespan in the world was, yet how readily they gave their lives. Many readers familiar with Middle-earth will recognize that line. A few words can conjure a vivid scene. The Souls series carries a similar sentiment. Ahead lies sorrow, but also fearlessness. The protagonists of Demon Souls, Dark Souls, and Elden Ring all embody that. That's part of why I love the Souls games. Otherwise, I would have refunded and run away after being beaten up by the small monsters. What I want to write about is the courage of 2 worlds, not just a simple power fantasy. Besides, each reader has their own scale for what counts as balanced power, so it's impossible to satisfy everyone. Why not instead focus on stories of courage, fearlessness, and love? I love Middle-earth because even minor characters, when faced with darkness, choose to fight despite their fear. I love the Souls series because its nameless protagonists, knowing the road is brutal, still step forward and ultimately confront gods. I also want readers unfamiliar with the Souls games to know they're not just about flashy combat and killing everything in sight. There are many touching moments in those games. Fellow fans who understand the series, feel free to give examples for those who don't. Of course, if you try the Souls games because of this and then get crushed by monsters, I take no responsibility, runs away. Chapter 37, Double Helix Structure, Phantom Tree? The return took far longer than the rapid assault had. They had to carry the bodies of the misbegotten who had fallen in battle and escort back Mills and the others who had surrendered. Tarns also followed the marks Rogier had made on the map. conveniently recovering a few hidden treasures along the way. It was early June when he reached Takrundale. By the time he arrived home, the month was nearly over. He had been gone almost a month. As they crested the last rise, the sight of his territory hit Tarns immediately. The golden tree had grown noticeably taller and broader. Afternoon sunlight poured across the plains, a few white clouds drifting in a wide blue sky. From a distance, Mills and the others could make out a tall castle and the towering tree at its heart. A little girl rode obediently on Toretti's back, and spotting them, asked in a clear, bright voice, "Sir Wizard, is that your land? That tree is so tall and bright." Tarns had been admiring how quickly the golden tree had changed and smiled at her. "Yes," he said, "that's the golden tree. It's very magical, it keeps you from catching colds and falling ill." "Can it bring my father back?" the girl asked, longing in her voice. Mills leaned over, whispering sharply, "Doris, don't ask strange questions. Be sensible, and don't trouble Sir Tarns." Tarns waved off Mills with a small gesture and answered the girl seriously. "I'm sorry. The dead cannot be brought back. I can't revive your father, but I'm sure he would want you and your mother to live well." The girl's mother stepped forward apologetically and patted her daughter's back. "Sorry, Sir Tarns. Doris misses her father." The child, chastised by the pat, blushed and said, "I'm sorry, Sir Tarnies." Two small boys, also sitting on Toretti's back, echoed the apology. The adults around them fell silent, holding their breath, afraid of displeasing their new lord. Tarns understood the caution. These people had been through harsh masters. Fear lingered in their reflexes. He felt a pang of sympathy for them and for the misbegotten, who returned their anxious glances with sympathetic looks of their own. The awkward hush was broken when a patrol of hate soldiers spotted them and hurried over, ranks snapping into respectful formation. "Tarns, Your Majesty, congratulations on your victorious return," called the lead soldier. He and his comrades dropped to one knee in a unified salute. Mills stiffened. The soldier's address, Your Majesty, caught him off guard. Tarns's standing was higher than anyone had guessed. The soldier's reverence was almost fanatical. Mills had the uneasy thought that they would obey him to the death. Tarns stepped forward, accepted the salute, then told them to rise. He turned to the patrol leader and gave orders. "Thank you for your patrol. Send word to Kenneth Haight that we have local refugees here who have pledged to the Golden Tree. Arrange a separate area for them and find suitable lodging." Tarnies wasn't yet certain how the Golden lineage handled outsiders. He didn't want to lodge Mills and the others among his people without caution. Such an abrupt integration could provoke conflict. Even dwarves and elves in this world had old quarrels. People with wholly different customs and habits would be harder. Besides, the Lion Hybrids expedition had this time taken all the misbegotten away. Otherwise, Tarns would have had to manage a tense three-way relationship between his people, the misbegotten, and these refugees. Integrating outsiders would have to be slow and deliberate. The patrol leader nodded eagerly. "We can escort them to Haight Fort. We were just about to return there." Tarnins glanced at the frozen corpses of the fallen misbegotten and then agreed. "All right, I still need to bring our fallen back to the tree, so I'll leave these people to you. They've just been freed from orc bondage and have traveled a long way. They're weak. Provide them a place to rest and food at once." "At once, Tarmes, Your Majesty," the captain replied, standing to attention. He waved to his men, who moved forward to lift the refugees' tattered bundles, scarcely luggage at all, and guide them toward Haight Fort. Tarns crouched near Mills and the others, who were puzzled by the soldiers' fervor, but too nervous to ask questions. "You don't need to worry," Tarns said quietly. "They'll take you to Haight Fort. People there will arrange your lodgings, individual houses, not the orcs' communal shelters." Mills nodded numbly. They trusted Tarns because of what he had done for them and how he had treated them. "I'll come at dinner to make sure everything is settled," Tarns added. That promise gave Mills and the rest the courage to follow the soldiers away. As the group separated, the soldiers cast sidelong, almost envious glances back toward the frozen misbegotten. Mills noticed and, curious, hesitated. The captain, noticing Mills's expression, asked, "Curious why we envy those corpses?" Mills nodded. The captain looked back at the bodies and smiled with a kind of reverence. Because they can return to the tree. Mills made a mental note of the phrase. Tarns, meanwhile, moving closer to the golden tree, felt something odd about its shape. It wasn't damaged, far from it, but its trunk changed at a certain point, a branch emerging, and then the whole trunk twisting. Golden light filtered through the leaves, illuminating where the branch began. From that section upward, the tree no longer grew straight. It spiraled, winding into a perfect double helix. The two trunks twisted around each other like the entwined arms of lovers, a structure Tarns had never seen in the lands between. Then realization struck. This was the golden tree's original form. The tree in the royal capital of Leyndell had been altered. He had seen a similar arrangement before. The double helix split, one tree standing in Leyndell's center and the other cast off into the shadowed side where records and traces had been erased. Tarns looked at the branch that glowed with a weaker, purer golden light and breathed, almost to himself, "Phantom Tree?" Chapter 38, Stormvale. Although Tarns had his doubts about the current state of the golden tree, he did his best to steady his unsettled mood and led the misbegotten, who were hauling the corpses of their fallen comrades, into Moan City's castle. He understood what returning to the golden tree meant to those who believed in it. This was the misbegotten's first return in many years, and he did not want to rob them of it by rushing them. As they passed through the golden lineage's residential district outside the city, the misbegotten straightened their chests and followed Tarns into the castle under the amazed stares of the golden lineage. When they reached the secluded courtyard where the golden tree stood, Tarns stopped. "We'll do it here," he said. "Let these who died gloriously in battle return to the embrace of the golden tree." He stepped to one of the carts and lifted a frozen corpse from it. "Tarns, your majesty, how can we let you?" the carrier stammered, reaching out. Tarns sidestepped his hand and spoke quietly to him and those behind him. "Let us send them off together. I know that in your hearts their deaths in battle are an honor, but if I could choose, I would have them still alive." The misbegotten withdrew his hand. He glanced at the others filing into the courtyard and nodded. Tarns's words sobered them. They understood that, honor or not, their fallen brethren would not speak or stand again. One by one, they pushed their carts forward, lifted the bodies, and placed them before the golden tree. Tarns laid the cold corpse of a scale-skinned hybrid onto the golden grass and released the snow magic that had bound it. The golden tree swayed lightly, its branches moving in a slow, rhythmic rustle like a mournful chant for the fallen. Golden leaves drifted down, trembling on the breeze as if the tree itself were weeping. The corpses were arranged neatly beneath the boughs. Their faces at last looked peaceful, as if sleeping. Leaves settled on them, soft and silent. Then a faint golden light rose from the bodies. It spread and shimmered, and the corpses began to grow transparent until they dissolved into clusters of brilliant motes. The lights leapt and spun, circling Tarns and the surrounding misbegotten, as if bidding a final farewell. After a few loops, they rose steadily and were absorbed back into the golden tree. A solemn silence fell, broken only by the sighing branches. Tarns closed his eyes and prayed for those who had returned to the tree. Behind him, the living misbegotten prostrated themselves on the golden grass, knelt 3 times, and then rose to murmur a soft remembrance for their dead. Tarns waited until the last of them had risen and paid him his respect before speaking. "Find Nifililu and have her arrange for our return to Takrandale. Prepare weapons, rations, bedding, for now, for about 300 people. There are old supplies in Moan City's warehouse that should do for Takrandale." The misbegotten nodded and filed out, taking their carts with them. Once the courtyard was empty, Tarns stepped to the trunk of the golden tree, closed his eyes, and reached into the Elden Ring within it. The golden tree was intact. In fact, thanks to the presence of the phantom tree, it could guide departed souls more safely and avoid being overwhelmed by death's corruption. The new phantom tree had also brought fresh visions into the Elden Ring, visions of the Land of Shadow. Tarn scanned the scenes of the Shadowland, then shook his head and set his focus on Stormvale Castle. The Golden Lineage did not know the Shadowland existed. To reveal those buried sins now would only cause panic. He also discovered that summoning things from the Shadowland did not draw on golden grace, but on phantom grace, the grace stored within the phantom tree. The phantom tree was new, and its stores of phantom grace were limited. It could not summon entire cities yet, but some familiar emanations could be called forth later to aid them. First, he would summon Stormvale Castle. If he had enough remaining grace, he would call forth more soldiers and residents. The misbegotten in Takrundel needed more brethren. The golden tree's accumulated grace, plus the orc souls he'd taken from Takrundel, should be enough. Once Stormvale Castle was summoned, Stormhawks, exiled soldiers, and banished knights could follow. Nefeli Lu would finally be the Storm King in practice, free of command over Godric's royal army. And there was even a demigod of the lands between he could summon. The grace required for that was far less than for Stormvale Castle. Tarns produced the soul collector Sellen had crafted. The deep blue glintstone vessel pulsed as he held it before the golden tree, and a stream of orc and warg souls poured out into the air. The golden tree drank them. The phantom tree beside it took shape and deepened into a black gold sheen. When the collector emptied, it dimmed and fell back into Tarns's hand. He set it against his chest and touched the trunk again. Sunlight passed through thinning clouds and fell across the two trees born together. The golden tree and phantom tree responded, each casting its own light. The golden tree shone a warm, molten gold, its leaves rippling like a river of gold in the breeze. The phantom tree glowed black gold, restrained yet impossible to ignore, like jewels hidden in the deep. Their radiances braided together and spread across the golden tree's lands. With a faint tremor, Stormvale Castle materialized around the golden tree. In the reshaping, Moan City shifted to the spot where Fort Haight had once stood. Fort Haight itself moved farther north of its original position. The gatefront ruins remained where they had always been, an outpost before Stormvale Castle. The dwarf and elf quarters stayed in place. The fields and farms were unaffected. The arrival of Stormvale Castle expanded the Golden Tree's territory significantly. It would now take a full day to walk from Stormvale Castle to Moan City, and half a day from Moan City to Fort Haight. Roads would have to be built between them to allow carriage travel. Tarns lingered in the Elden Ring, feeling the remaining grace. He planned to summon more if there was enough. Inside Moan City's City Lord Hall, Rozier watched the light outside the window thin and beheld the magnificent silhouette of Stormvale Castle in the distance. He smiled at Dee and Nefeli Lukes behind him. "Want to guess what Tarns brought over this time?" he asked. Dee, who had been praying as the light washed over them, tossed off one word: boring. Rozier pretended to pout and looked at Nefeli. She closed her eyes, sensing the air, and then opened them, bright. "I feel a familiar thing on the wind," she said. "A flock of eagles, stormhawks, they're back." Chapter 39. It all makes sense, if you call it sorcery. When Mills came to, the light had faded and Stormvale City rose in the distance. Its walls climbed so high they seemed to pierce the clouds, built of meticulously cut bluestone blocks that made the whole thing feel impossibly strong. The stones, nearly square and precisely fitted, had been smoothed by master masons until their edges met like the teeth of a lock. Octagonal towers punctuated the ramparts at regular intervals, both supporting the wall and providing overlapping fields of fire for archers. From afar, the whole city looked like a colossal Gothic sculpture. Gray stone softened by gold trim and banners, reliefs and carvings that gave every block an elaborate face. The tower tops branched and flared like sculpted limbs, as if the city was offering prayers to the sky. Mills blinked at the sight, then glanced at the young blonde woman beside him. Roderica, golden eyes fixed toward the golden tree. She had just been praying. She folded her hands and smiled when he spoke. "Miss Roderica, what city is that?" he asked. She laughed softly and relaxed her posture. "Don't worry, Mr. Mills. That's Lord Tarns. He's casting glintstone magic, calling back his territory and his people." The name glintstone magic wiped the frantic curiosity from Mills' face and replaced it with awe. "Lord Tarns is incredible. I'd heard sorcerers could do strange things, but I never imagined something like this." He squinted at the golden tree off to one side, which pulsed with two different lights. Roderica nodded inwardly. Lord Kenneth Haight had been right. Tell people a phenomenon was glintstone magic, and they would find reasons to believe it. It was a reliable explanation for humans, dwarves, and elves alike. She kept her smile and led the group toward a small cluster of elven-style houses. The houses looked grown rather than built. Rough logs, their annual rings visible beneath a soft polish, roofs matted with moss so they blended into the forest. Sunbeams filtered through the canopy and dappled the porches. Carved log stools sat scattered about, their seats covered in springy moss. The doors were open, letting a faint woody scent out, and small ornaments of woven twigs tinkled softly in the breeze. Vines crept up the walls, punctuated by tiny crystalline flowers that glinted like beads of dew. The whole place felt like an artful clearing more than a settlement. Mills and the others hesitated. They had expected simple shelters. These felt too fine for them. He cleared his throat. Are these really for us? Aren't these for the elves? Roderica's smile didn't waver. Don't worry. The elves built these to help Lord Tarns. They were always meant to house people. There are just a lot of empty ones. Few people in the territory right now. She teased them a little. If you'd rather, you can live in the dwarves' stone houses. They're similar inside, but the dwarves are loud. If you can stand the constant clatter, I'll show you there. No, thank you. We'll stay here, Mills said quickly, flushing. Good. Roderica gestured toward the houses. Pick whichever you like. Soldiers will bring you some clean clothes in a bit. Each house has a bathing area. The water basin is behind these buildings. Lord Kenneth ordered the soldiers to fetch fresh river water, but you'll have to fetch your own later. The stream isn't far. We're at Hate Fort now. South of here is Moan City. See that large castle and wall? That's Moan. The Golden Trees people live there. You can visit, but some folks have short tempers. There are elves and dwarves there too. You can buy supplies once you have coin. Behind Moan is Stormvale City, which Lord Tarns just summoned. It's mostly empty at the moment. You can explore it later. Mills nodded, jotting down the details in his head, and then bowed his thanks. Thank you, Miss Roderica. She watched them head into the elven houses with something like satisfaction, then turned and left. At the same time, Tarns rode into Moan City on Torete. Lord Tarns, welcome back, said a respectful voice as Tarns dismounted. Dee stood at the gate of Moan City's keep, perfectly composed. Rogier lounged in the passage, one hand lifting the brim of his pointed hat in a casual greeting. Took you long enough, Tarns said with a grin, and then, to his surprise, embraced Dee and Rogier both. Dee stiffened and only half returned the hug. We got back this morning, Dee said. Rogier chimed in. We were just telling Nephili Lukes about Eriador when we felt this huge light. We knew you'd come back. Earlier, when Gandalf had mentioned Eriador, Tarnas had asked Elrond about it as the elves crossed in. Elrond's knowledge, however, reached only so far back. He spoke of the Second Age, a time when formless primeval forests had clothed that land, when Eriador had been the western portion of a vast wood. Then came a terrible war that ripped the forest apart, and Eriador had become a place the elves rarely set foot in since. Tarns had thought about that as he approached. So, he asked Dee and Rogier, what did you find? What's Eriador like now? Rogier hesitated, then grinned. One bit of bad news, one bit of good. Which do you want first? Dee rolled his eyes and cut him off. Ignore Rogier's games. Lord Tarns, there's no spin here. Eriador. Terrible, Rogier finished flatly. There was more to report. Chapter 40. Eriador. In the early Second Age, the whole northwestern stretch of Middle-earth had been covered by vast primeval forests. The woods on the Eriador promontory were only a part of that great green. The people of those woods were an indigenous human folk, distant kin to the House of Hareth. But with the return of the Númenóreans to Middle-earth and the outbreak of the War of the Elves and Sauron, the ancient forest had been heavily ravaged. The Númenóreans felled trees for shipbuilding, and Sauron's forces set whole tracts alight. By the late Second Age, many of the forest folk had fled into Eriador. Those who survived kept to themselves, becoming a secretive, hunting people. Tarnes had already arrived at the city lord's hall, accompanied by Rogier and Dee. He greeted Nephili Lu, who had just finished attending to other matters of Moan City, and sent a messenger for Edgar so the deputy could hear Rogier and Dee's report. For Nephili, it was the second time hearing the details. Tarns tapped the table once, a crisp sound, and Rogier closed his mouth at once, answering the question in his eyes. Tarns voiced his doubts. I listened to your and Dee's introduction about Eriador. It didn't sound like anything special. Why did you say it was terrible? Rogier laughed, a good-natured sound, and then glanced at Dee's armor. That's because after we met those hunting folk, they tried to hunt us. It might also be that Darian's armor frightened them. Dee bristled. That has nothing to do with my armor. You saw how they live. Savages, both men and women wearing animal hide vests that leave their chests bare, rough vines tied around their waists, a simple hide skirt, and sandals woven from bark. If you'd seen them in the dark, I'd have taken them for misbegotten or other demi-humans. Tarns considered for a moment. So the people in Eriador are still in a primitive tribal state? Rogier nodded. Yes, the information I gave you comes from after we put down the hunting party. The one fortunate thing is that we can understand each other's language. Edgar, now Deputy City Lord of Moan City, spoke in his deep voice. Lord Tarns, if you want to bring these folk under your rule, it will take serious effort. I don't mean conquering them. Defeating them in battle would be easy, but making them submit and civilizing them afterward is another matter. Dee agreed. They're hard to reach. Even after they knew we were human like them, they still wanted to hunt us as food. It's incomprehensible. Tarns turned to Rogier. What do you think? Rogier shrugged. I agree with Darian. They're xenophobic and low in civilization. There's nothing strategically vital in Eriador. Leaving them alone won't affect the Golden Tree. Tarnis nodded. Understood. We'll leave Eriador for now. He cleared his throat and briefed everyone in the hall on matters of Tockrendale and his plan to find Gandalf later. Nephili, Stormvale Castle will be under your charge. It's like returning the castle to its rightful owner. It was the Storm King's seat, wasn't it? Tarnis smiled at Nephili Lu. She listened quietly, then returned the smile. Yes, that way I can hand Moan City back to Edgar. This castle is familiar to him. He should manage it. Edgar protested at once. No, Lord Nephili Lux is flattering me. Your understanding of Moan City in these past days has equaled mine. Your management has impressed me, worthy of the Storm King. Nephili waved away the praise, then grew serious. Tarns, I'm afraid your plan to find Gandalf will have to be postponed. Something else has happened while you've been away, something involving the dwarves. Tarnans went tense. Involving the dwarves? Have they finally started fighting the elves? No one's been hurt, have they? What about the elves? The only thing that would make him abandon the search for Gandalf on the spot would be open war between dwarves and elves. Nephili saw his worry and quickly explained, You misunderstand. The dwarves and elves here don't get along perfectly, but they live in peace. They've agreed boundaries and stick to their own regions. There have been minor disputes, arguments, but no real fighting. Tarns relaxed. Then what about the dwarves? After you drove the misbegotten away, Nephili said, a dwarf named Fili returned with many wagons. He said he'd come to trade with the Golden Tree under an agreement his teacher had made. Tarns thought for a moment. Yes, I remember that. Then? Anything unexpected? Nephili continued. No, trade has gone smoothly. Stay. More dwarves arrived and set up a trading quarter for commerce with us. They weren't interested in ores or gems here, but they were very pleased with our fruits, vegetables, the Golden Tree's eggs, and the wool. But the key point is this. Fili left a message for you. He says his uncle Thorin will arrive around mid-July. Tarns raised an eyebrow. Thorin? Why would Thorin come? He didn't say much, Nephili admitted. He only said it was to thank you. Perhaps you helped some dwarves on your way back from Tockrendale. Tarnans was puzzled. Wait, thank me? I didn't see any dwarves on the road from Tockrendale. Nephili shrugged. We'll see when he arrives. Time moved on, neither fast nor slow, and mid-July of the year 2939 came round. The Golden Tree territory continued to develop steadily. The new misbegotten had been gathered by Tarns in late June and quickly dispatched to Limgrave Greatbridge with supplies. The lion hybrid had sent back a winged hybrid and a letter reporting on Tockrendale. Aside from the occasional orc who came to scout and was picked off by the winged hybrids in patrol, things were quiet. Nephili had returned to Stormvale Castle, and the Stormhawks kept watch above the Golden Tree lands, spotting threats and relaying information to the Kingrick royal army below. Before Thorin's arrival, Tarns had drawn labor from the Golden lineage to build roads linking Stormvale Castle, Moan City, and Fort Haight. Minheriath was thinly populated and rich in stone, so supplies for the roadworks were plentiful. Tarns sent Rogier and Dee out again, this time towards Shabard, another ruin Elrond had asked him to rebuild. If the orcs were daring enough to repair Takrundale, Shabard, on the same river basin, should be no different. Better to send scouts now and see what they'd find. Rogier joked before leaving that he'd become Tarns's exclusive pathfinder. Dee didn't object this time. He rather liked the title. On the very day Tarns received the lion hybrid's reply, he heard word that Thorin had arrived. Then Thorin himself appeared beside the golden tree, rushing over with a joyful grin. Tarnis, praise be to you, my friend. Thank you for giving Fili and Kili such powerful sorcery. Thorin's broad dwarven smile looked almost out of place among his kin as he threw his arms around Tarns and hugged him. Fili and Kili tumbled out of the carriage behind him, surprised at their uncle's unusually open happiness. Tarnas returned the embrace and smiled, thinking inwardly, powerful sorcery? He must mean those prayers I taught them. 2 updates, really. Don't forget my recommendation tickets, monthly passes, and rewards. Bows.